Success through adversity begins with a simple but unsettling realization. The obstacles in front of you are not interruptions to your path. They are the path itself. Every life that rises to greatness, every entrepreneur who built something meaningful, every leader who guided others through chaos, every athlete who endured the pain of discipline, has stood exactly where you might be standing now, facing resistance, uncertainty, and the quiet temptation to give up. But hidden inside those moments is a powerful shift in perception. The Stoic philosophers believe that events themselves are neutral. It is our judgment about them that gives them weight. A problem can feel like a wall, or it can become a doorway. The difference lies in how the mind chooses to see it. When you begin to understand this, something remarkable happens. Adversity stops feeling like an enemy and starts revealing itself as a training ground. Pressure sharpens awareness. Difficulty builds endurance. And struggle, when faced with calm discipline, becomes the raw material of growth. Imagine looking at every setback not with frustration, but with strategic curiosity. Imagine meeting stress with steady breath, choosing thoughtful action over emotional reaction, focusing only on what you can control while letting the rest dissolve into the background. This mindset does not promise an easy life, but it does promise a powerful one. And before we embark this audiobook journey, if this journey of resilience, clarity, and inner strength resonates with you, take a brief moment to like this audiobook and press subscribe, so that these ideas can travel further and reach those who may be standing in their own moment of struggle, searching for a way forward. Because once the mind begins to see obstacles differently, the world itself begins to change, and what once looked like resistance slowly transforms into momentum. And now, gear up your headphone. Friends, the moment you begin to see obstacles differently, the entire landscape of your life quietly begins to shift. What once felt like resistance now reveals itself as information, as feedback, as a challenge placed before you not to stop your progress, but to sharpen it. The Stoic thinkers understood something profound about the human mind. Events themselves are rarely the true source of suffering. It is our interpretation, our perception, that gives those events their power over us. Two people can face the same difficulty, the same loss, the same unexpected barrier, and yet walk away with completely different experiences. One feels defeated, the other feels awakened. The difference is not in the obstacle, but in the lens through which it is seen. And this is where the discipline of perception begins to quietly transform everything. Imagine standing in the middle of a difficult moment, an unexpected failure in business, a plan collapsing just when you believed success was near, a sudden crisis that demands leadership when you feel least prepared. In those moments, the mind has a habit of rushing forward, filling the space with fear, frustration, and emotional reaction. But the Stoic path invites something different. It asks you to pause, to observe, to separate the event from the judgment you attach to it. Because when the mind learns to slow down in the presence of adversity, it begins to see things that panic would otherwise hide. The obstacle, when examined carefully, often contains the very lesson needed to overcome it. What looked like a barrier may actually be revealing a weakness in strategy. What felt like rejection may be guiding you toward a stronger direction. What seemed like failure may simply be the early stage of mastery taking shape through struggle. When perception becomes disciplined, the emotional noise begins to fade, and in its place appears clarity, calm thinking under pressure, the ability to look directly at reality without exaggeration or despair. And with that clarity comes a powerful sense of control. Not control over events themselves, because life rarely grants that privilege, but control over the one domain that truly belongs to you, your response. The Stoics believe that this distinction between what is within our control and what is not is the beginning of inner freedom. Circumstances may rise and fall, markets may change, plans may unravel, people may disappoint, but the mind that understands this principle refuses to surrender its stability to chaos. It focuses its energy only where action is possible. As that understanding deepens, perception evolves from simple awareness into strategic advantage. The entrepreneur who faces setbacks begins to ask better questions. The athlete who encounters defeat studies the moment instead of fearing it. The leader in the middle of crisis learns to examine the situation with calm precision, recognizing that emotional discipline often reveals opportunities hidden within the pressure itself. Instead of reacting impulsively, they observe patterns, anticipate outcomes, and adjust their approach with patience. Over time, this quiet habit of disciplined perception begins to reshape character. Problems are no longer personal attacks, but puzzles waiting to be solved. Stress becomes a signal that growth is happening at the edge of your comfort. Adversity becomes a teacher whose lessons, though difficult, carry the potential to build resilience, mental toughness, and long-term strength. The mind grows steadier, less shaken by temporary setbacks, more focused on the larger path unfolding over time. And as this perspective settles deeper within you, something remarkable begins to emerge. Where others see chaos, you begin to see structure. Where others feel overwhelmed, you notice patterns and possibilities. What once looked like a wall now appears as terrain that can be navigated, studied, and eventually mastered. The obstacle does not disappear, but your relationship with it changes completely. Because perception, when trained with patience and honesty, transforms the battlefield of life into something else entirely. A place where challenges become training, pressure becomes preparation, and every moment of hardship carries within it the quiet promise of progress for the person willing to see clearly. Once the mind begins to see obstacles with clarity instead of fear, something deeper quietly awakens within you. The realization that your greatest power was never outside of you in the first place. It was never hidden in perfect conditions, flawless timing, or the absence of difficulty. Your power has always lived in the space between what happens to you and how you choose to respond. This understanding, simple yet profound, is where true strength begins to take shape. Because life will always present forces beyond your command. Markets shift, opportunities close unexpectedly, people change their minds, storms arrive without warning, and circumstances unfold in ways that no amount of planning could fully predict. The Stoic thinkers understood this reality with remarkable honesty. They did not promise control over the world. Instead, they pointed toward a quieter form of authority, the mastery of one's own perception, decisions, and actions. When you recognize this distinction, the chaos around you begins to lose its ability to dominate your inner state. What belongs to you is your judgment. What belongs to you is your effort. What belongs to you is the discipline of your thoughts, the steadiness of your emotions, and the direction of your actions even when the road ahead is uncertain. This is not a small kind of power. It is the kind that builds resilience in the face of failure, the kind that keeps an entrepreneur experimenting after setbacks, the kind that allows a leader to remain calm when others are losing their composure. And it becomes especially visible during moments of pressure. Imagine a crisis unfolding, a plan collapsing, a company facing uncertainty, a personal ambition suddenly blocked by an unexpected obstacle. In those moments, the world may feel unstable, yet the person who understands their true power does something different. Instead of being consumed by the situation, they begin asking quiet questions. What part of this situation is within my control? What action can I take right now? What lesson is this moment trying to teach me? These questions shift the focus away from frustration and toward possibility. The obstacle may still stand there, unmoved and demanding, but the mind has already begun to move around it. Strategic thinking replaces emotional reaction. Discipline replaces panic. And slowly, almost invisibly, progress begins to return. Recognizing your power does not mean pretending that hardship is easy. It means understanding that difficulty is not the end of the story. The Stoic mindset invites you to see adversity as a testing ground where inner strength is forged. Just as muscles grow stronger through resistance, character develops through challenges that demand patience, persistence, and thoughtful action. Without obstacles, there would be no opportunity to practice resilience, no pressure to refine strategy, no reason to cultivate the calm thinking that separates reaction from mastery. And so the person who understands this principle begins to welcome responsibility in a different way. Instead of waiting for circumstances to become perfect, they begin shaping progress with whatever tools are available. Small actions taken with discipline become powerful over time. A steady mind becomes a strategic advantage. Emotional control becomes the quiet engine behind clear decision-making. This realization often changes how leaders move through difficult moments. When others become overwhelmed by uncertainty, they anchor themselves in the only place where power truly exists, the present decision. They focus on the next step, not the entire mountain. They direct their attention toward solutions instead of complaints. And through that calm persistence, they transform pressure into momentum. What once felt like limitation begins to reveal itself as structure. The boundaries of a problem show you where creativity must begin. The resistance of a challenge forces you to sharpen your thinking. The delays that once felt frustrating become opportunities to develop patience and long-term vision. Over time, this awareness deepens into something steady and unshakable. You begin to trust your ability to navigate difficulty because you understand that the external world does not control the quality of your response. Even in moments where success seems distant, there remains one thing that can never be taken from you: the choice to act with clarity, discipline, and courage. And as that choice is repeated again and again, through small struggles and larger trials alike, a quiet confidence forms beneath the surface. Not the loud confidence that depends on constant victory, but the deeper confidence that comes from knowing that whatever obstacle appears next, you possess the power to meet it with a steady mind, a deliberate action, and a will that refuses to be easily shaken. Friends, the quiet confidence that begins to grow once you recognize your power faces its first real test in moments of pressure, because clarity is easy when the world is calm, but when tension rises, when plans begin to collapse and uncertainty closes in, the mind has a natural instinct to panic. The heart beats faster, thoughts scatter, emotions push for immediate reaction. This is the moment where many people lose their advantage, not because the obstacle itself is unbeatable, but because their nerves betray them before the challenge is even fully understood. Yet the Stoic mindset asks for something different in these exact moments. It asks for steadiness, not the absence of fear, but the ability to remain composed while fear tries to take control. The ability to slow down the rush of emotion long enough for reason to speak. When pressure arrives, the disciplined mind learns to pause instead of react, to breathe instead of panic, to observe instead of exaggerate. What looked like chaos begins to reveal its structure when the noise of anxiety fades. Imagine standing at the center of a crisis where decisions must be made quickly. A business is struggling, a competition is slipping away, A carefully built plan is suddenly interrupted by forces outside your control. In these moments, the greatest advantage does not belong to the loudest voice or the fastest reaction. It belongs to the calmest mind, because a steady mind can see clearly what others miss. It notices opportunities hidden inside the pressure. It recognizes that obstacles are rarely as overwhelming as they first appear when examined with patience. This steadiness is not something people are simply born with. It is developed through discipline. Every time you resist the urge to overreact, every time you train your thoughts to remain grounded in reality rather than worst-case imagination, you strengthen a kind of mental muscle. Over time, this practice builds resilience, allowing you to face increasingly difficult situations without losing clarity. Instead of being swept away by circumstances, you become the person capable of standing still while everything else is moving. There is a strategic reason for this calm. Panic narrows perception. When the mind is overwhelmed by emotion, it sees only threats, only problems, only the immediate discomfort of the situation. Calm thinking does the opposite. It widens the field of vision. Possibilities become visible. Solutions appear where panic once saw only dead ends. Strategic patience begins to replace frantic effort. Leaders throughout history have understood this truth. In moments when entire groups looked toward them for guidance, their first responsibility was not dramatic action, but composure. A calm presence stabilizes everyone around it. When others feel the pressure of uncertainty, they naturally follow the person who remains grounded. The leader who steadies their own nerves creates a space where thoughtful decisions can emerge. This same principle applies to personal struggles as well. When faced with rejection, failure, or unexpected setbacks, emotional discipline becomes a powerful ally. Instead of allowing disappointment to define the moment, you begin examining it with curiosity. What actually happened here? What lesson is hidden beneath the frustration? What adjustment can transform this setback into progress? By asking these questions calmly, the obstacle slowly transforms. What first felt like defeat becomes feedback. The problem becomes a teacher. You begin to realize that most challenges do not require extraordinary genius to overcome. They require patience, observation, and the refusal to be shaken too easily. Over time, the mind that practices this discipline begins to carry an unusual strength. Difficult moments no longer provoke the same intensity of fear. Pressure becomes familiar terrain rather than foreign territory. Even when challenges appear unexpectedly, there is a quiet voice inside reminding you that the situation itself has not yet decided the outcome. That reminder becomes powerful during long journeys of ambition and personal growth. Entrepreneurs navigating uncertainty, athletes enduring exhausting training, students pushing through intellectual difficulty, leaders guiding others through unpredictable change. All of them encounter moments where the road ahead seems unstable. The ones who continue forward are not necessarily the most talented or the most fortunate. They are the ones who learn to keep their nerves steady long enough to think clearly and act wisely. Once that steadiness becomes a habit, adversity begins to lose much of its intimidation. Challenges still exist, pressure still arrives, but the internal response has changed. Instead of chaos, there is focus. Instead of panic, there is patience. Instead of emotional reaction, there is thoughtful movement toward the next step. Gradually, with each obstacle faced in this way, the mind becomes quieter, stronger, more deliberate. Difficult moments no longer feel like storms that must be escaped. They begin to resemble waves that can be navigated with skill and composure, carrying you forward as long as your balance remains steady and your attention stays fixed on the path ahead. The steadiness of the mind, once it learns to remain calm in moments of pressure, reveals another challenge waiting quietly beneath the surface. It is not always the obstacle outside that threatens progress. More often, the real danger rises from within. Emotions surge quickly, sometimes faster than thought itself. Anger flares when things feel unfair. Fear grows when outcomes become uncertain. Frustration appears when effort does not immediately bring reward. In these moments, friends, the obstacle is no longer the problem in front of you. It is the emotional storm inside you. This is where the discipline of emotional control begins to matter. The Stoic thinkers understood that emotions are powerful forces, but they also recognized that uncontrolled emotion clouds judgment and weakens action. When anger takes control, decisions become reckless. When fear dominates the mind, opportunities begin to look like threats. When frustration grows unchecked, patience disappears and long-term vision collapses into short-term reaction. The world itself has not changed in those moments. Only the emotional lens through which you see it has shifted. That is why emotional discipline is not about suppressing feelings or pretending that difficulties do not hurt. Instead, it is about learning to create a space between the feeling and the reaction. Imagine someone speaking harshly to you, a plan suddenly failing, or a situation unfolding in a way that feels deeply unfair. The immediate emotional response might demand retaliation, blame, or surrender. But the trained mind pauses. It observes the emotion rather than becoming it. That pause, sometimes only a few seconds long, is where your real strength begins to show. Friends, consider how often great opportunities are lost simply because emotions moved faster than wisdom. A talented entrepreneur abandons a promising idea after early criticism. A leader damages trust by reacting with anger in a tense meeting. An athlete loses focus in the middle of competition because frustration takes control. The obstacle itself might have been manageable, but the emotional reaction multiplied its difficulty. When emotions are guided rather than obeyed, the situation changes dramatically. Calm thinking begins to replace impulsive reaction. Strategic thinking becomes possible. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" the mind asks, "What can I do with this moment?" The energy that once fueled anger or panic becomes redirected toward problem solving and disciplined action. This transformation does not happen overnight. Emotional mastery is built through constant awareness. Every challenge becomes an opportunity to practice. Each moment of irritation invites patience. Every disappointment offers the chance to strengthen resilience. Slowly, the mind learns that emotions are signals, not commands. They provide information, but they do not have the authority to decide your next move. Over time, something remarkable begins to develop inside you. Situations that once triggered intense reactions start to feel manageable. The same criticism that once felt unbearable now becomes useful feedback. The same pressure that once created anxiety becomes a reminder to focus. Emotional storms still appear, but they pass more quickly because the mind no longer feeds them with impulsive response. Leaders who cultivate this discipline often stand out in difficult moments. When everyone else becomes reactive, they remain thoughtful. When tension fills the room, they speak with clarity rather than anger. This calm authority creates stability not only within themselves, but also among the people around them. Others begin to trust the person who does not lose control when pressure rises. The same principle strengthens personal growth as well. Emotional discipline makes long-term thinking possible. Without it, people chase temporary satisfaction, abandoning difficult goals the moment discomfort appears. With it, patience becomes natural. Effort continues even when progress is slow. Failure becomes information rather than humiliation. Gradually, Friends, you begin to notice a deeper shift taking place. The mind becomes less distracted by emotional turbulence and more focused on purposeful action. Energy once wasted on worry or resentment becomes available for learning, creating, and improving. Obstacles still exist, but they no longer dominate your inner world. This quiet mastery of emotion creates a powerful advantage. It allows you to move through adversity with clarity, to respond to challenges with intelligence, and to continue forward even when others become overwhelmed. Strength stops being loud or dramatic. It becomes calm, deliberate, and steady. In that steady space, where emotions no longer control the direction of your actions, the mind becomes free to see reality clearly again. Problems become puzzles rather than threats. Opportunities begin to appear inside difficulties. And with each moment of disciplined response, the path ahead becomes a little clearer, inviting you to move forward with patience, purpose, and the quiet confidence that your inner world is no longer ruled by every passing storm. Once emotions are no longer allowed to dominate every reaction, the mind slowly begins to clear, like fog lifting from a landscape that was always there but impossible to see clearly before. In that clearer space, something powerful becomes possible: objectivity. This ability to see events as they truly are, without exaggeration, without unnecessary fear, without emotional distortion, becomes one of the most valuable skills a person can develop when navigating obstacles. Because, friends, the truth is that many problems feel larger than they actually are simply because the mind has colored them with anxiety, assumptions, and stories that may not even be real. I want you to imagine standing in front of a challenge that initially feels overwhelming. Perhaps a project has failed. Perhaps criticism has arrived unexpectedly. Perhaps a door you hoped would open has quietly closed. The first reaction of the human mind is often interpretation rather than observation. We begin telling ourselves stories. This is a disaster. This means I am not capable. This will ruin everything. Yet none of those statements are facts. They are judgments layered on top of events. The Stoic philosophers spent centuries teaching that the discipline of perception begins by separating what actually happened from what we think it means. Objectivity begins with a simple question: what is truly happening here? Not what you fear, not what your pride suggests, not what frustration is whispering in your ear, but the plain reality of the situation. When the mind learns to return to facts rather than assumptions, obstacles immediately lose much of their emotional power. The situation may still be difficult, but it is no longer distorted by imagination. Friends, think about how often stress multiplies because we rush ahead of reality. A single mistake becomes a prediction of total failure. A delay becomes proof that progress is impossible. A critical comment becomes a belief that everyone is against us. Yet when viewed objectively, most challenges are far more specific and manageable than the stories we create around them. This is where calm observation becomes a powerful advantage. Instead of reacting immediately, the disciplined mind studies the situation. What exactly went wrong? What elements of this problem are within my control? What part of the obstacle is real, and what part exists only in my interpretation of it? When these questions are asked honestly, clarity begins to return. Objectivity does something remarkable to the human mind. It transforms emotional confusion into practical thinking. Problems become puzzles rather than threats. Energy shifts away from frustration and toward analysis. The obstacle stops being a source of panic and starts becoming material for strategy. I sometimes imagine the mind as a lens through which reality is viewed. When emotions, ego, or fear cloud that lens, everything appears distorted. But when the lens is cleaned through objectivity, the same situation reveals details that were previously hidden. Solutions appear where there once seemed to be only resistance. This clarity becomes especially valuable during moments of pressure. Leaders guiding teams through uncertainty rely heavily on this skill. Instead of reacting to rumors or exaggerated fears, they focus on facts. Instead of letting emotions dictate decisions, they gather information, analyze calmly, and respond with deliberate action. Their composure is not accidental. It is built on the habit of seeing reality clearly. Athletes develop a similar discipline. When a mistake happens during competition, the emotional reaction might demand frustration or self-criticism. But the athlete who practices objectivity treats the moment differently. The mistake becomes information, something to adjust, something to learn from immediately rather than something to suffer over emotionally. The same principle strengthens everyday personal growth. When failure is viewed objectively, it stops feeling like an attack on identity and starts becoming feedback. You are no longer trapped in the drama of the event. Instead, you stand slightly outside of it, observing carefully, extracting lessons, and preparing the next move. Over time, this practice builds an extraordinary form of mental toughness. Situations that once felt overwhelming begin to look manageable because the mind no longer inflates them unnecessarily. Challenges are approached with curiosity rather than dread. Difficulties are examined rather than feared. Friends, this does not mean the path suddenly becomes easy. Obstacles will still appear, sometimes unexpectedly and sometimes repeatedly. Yet the person who has learned objectivity walks into those moments with a powerful advantage. Their perception is no longer working against them. It is working for them. Gradually, the mind becomes quieter and more precise. Reactions slow down. Observation sharpens. What once felt like chaos begins to reveal patterns and possibilities. In that calm clarity, action becomes more intelligent, patience becomes easier, and the obstacle itself begins to look less like a wall and more like a problem waiting patiently for the right mind to understand it. Clarity has a quiet power. When the mind learns to see reality without distortion, the obstacle in front of you becomes less intimidating and more understandable. Yet something even more transformative begins to unfold when perception itself evolves. Because objectivity shows you the facts of a situation, but perspective determines what those facts mean for your future. Two people can stand in front of the exact same difficulty, and one will see defeat while the other sees possibility. The difference is not the obstacle. It is the way the mind chooses to interpret it. Friends, perspective is one of the most powerful forces shaping human experience. It decides whether a challenge feels like punishment or preparation, whether resistance feels like rejection or redirection. The Stoic thinkers understood that the events of life are rarely as significant as the meaning we assign to them. When that meaning shifts, the emotional weight of the situation changes with it. Imagine encountering a setback in your career or a failure in a personal goal. At first glance, the moment might appear discouraging. Plans have been interrupted. Expectations have collapsed. The mind immediately begins forming conclusions about what this means for the future. But perspective has the ability to interrupt that automatic narrative and offer a different lens. Instead of asking why the obstacle appeared, the wiser question becomes what role it might play in shaping your progress. Resistance forces creativity. Delay strengthens patience. Difficulty develops discipline. The very thing that seemed like an enemy often becomes the tool that sharpens your abilities. I often think about how many great achievements were born from circumstances that initially looked like defeat. Entrepreneurs build stronger companies after early failures reveal weaknesses in their strategy. Athletes improve their performance after painful losses expose the limits of their preparation. Leaders grow wiser through crises that demand courage and thoughtful decision-making. In each of these cases, the obstacle itself became a form of instruction. Friends, when perspective changes, energy begins to shift as well. The mind stops wasting effort on frustration and begins investing energy into understanding the opportunity hidden within the difficulty. A blocked path becomes an invitation to find a new route. A closed door becomes a signal to develop new skills or rethink the strategy entirely. Perspective also protects the mind from the trap of short-term thinking. Many obstacles feel unbearable because they are viewed only through the lens of the present moment. When seen from a longer timeline, their meaning changes dramatically. What feels like a painful delay today may later reveal itself as the exact moment that redirected you towards something greater. This broader view requires patience. The Stoic mindset encourages stepping back from immediate emotion and examining the larger pattern of life. Challenges that seem overwhelming when viewed up close often appear manageable when seen from a distance. The obstacle stops feeling like the end of the road and begins to look like a bend in the journey. There is another important shift that occurs when perspective evolves. Instead of seeing yourself as a victim of circumstance, you begin to see yourself as a participant in shaping the outcome. This subtle change restores a sense of agency. Even when conditions are imperfect, there remains something you can influence: your response, your effort, your interpretation of the moment. That realization becomes deeply empowering. Difficult situations stop feeling like traps and start resembling training grounds. Each obstacle carries the potential to refine patience, strengthen resilience, and deepen strategic thinking. What once felt like resistance begins to look like raw material for growth. Friends, altering perspective does not remove difficulty from life. Obstacles will continue to appear, sometimes unexpectedly and sometimes repeatedly. Yet the mind that has learned to see them differently walks into those moments with a quiet advantage. Instead of reacting with discouragement, it becomes curious. Instead of shrinking away from resistance, it leans forward with determination. Over time, this shift in perception becomes almost automatic. Challenges arrive, but the mind instinctively searches for the opportunity within them. The question is no longer whether an obstacle exists, but how it can be used. The same situation that once created frustration now invites strategy, patience, and thoughtful action. Gradually, the landscape of adversity begins to look very different. What once felt like barriers begin to resemble stepping stones, and the path forward, though still demanding, starts to reveal itself as a journey shaped not by the absence of obstacles, but by the powerful decision to see them through a lens that transforms struggle into progress. The moment perspective begins to change, another question quietly rises to the surface, a question that has the power to simplify even the most complicated struggles. What in this situation is actually within my control? So many obstacles feel overwhelming not because they are impossible to overcome, but because the mind wastes enormous energy fighting things that were never ours to control in the first place. Friends, this distinction is one of the most important insights offered by the Stoic way of thinking. It reminds us that while the world may be unpredictable, our response to it remains firmly within our reach. Consider how often frustration grows from circumstances that lie completely outside personal influence. A market changes unexpectedly. Someone else makes a poor decision that affects your plans, weather disrupts an important event, or opportunity arrives later than expected. The human mind naturally reacts with resistance, wishing the situation were different. Yet wishing does not change reality. Energy spent fighting the uncontrollable drains the focus needed for the actions that actually matter. The Stoic philosophers built their entire philosophy on a powerful realization. Some things are up to us, and some things are not. Our thoughts, our choices, our effort, our discipline, our patience, these belong to us. The actions of other people, the passage of time, the unpredictable shifts of fortune, these do not. When this boundary becomes clear, something remarkable happens. The mind stops struggling against the uncontrollable and begins concentrating fully on the areas where influence is possible. I often imagine this principle as a circle of control surrounding each person. Inside that circle live the things you can shape directly: your attitude, your preparation, your persistence, the quality of your work. Outside the circle exist the forces you must learn to accept: luck, timing, opinions, unexpected disruptions. Many people spend their lives trying to command the outer circle, only to feel exhausted and powerless. The wiser approach is to strengthen everything within the inner one. Friends, think about how powerful this shift can become in real moments of adversity. Imagine an entrepreneur facing criticism or rejection while building something meaningful. The reaction of others may not be controllable, but the entrepreneur's response, the decision to improve, adapt, and continue, remains entirely within reach. An athlete cannot control the opponent's skill or the referee's call, but discipline and training and mental focus during competition remain firmly theirs to command. This understanding creates a profound form of mental freedom. When you stop demanding control over every outcome, frustration begins to fade. Instead of fighting reality, the mind becomes more strategic. The obstacle no longer feels like a personal attack from the universe. It simply becomes a condition that must be navigated. I have often noticed that people who master this principle move through life with a different kind of calm. They do not panic when circumstances become difficult because their attention is already directed toward what they can influence. They ask practical questions. What can I improve here? What action is still available to me? Where should my effort go next? This clarity prevents energy from being wasted on blame, resentment, or endless worry. Emotional storms lose much of their power because the mind has chosen a different focus. It returns again and again to the same guiding thought. If it is within my control, I will work on it with discipline and patience. If it is not, I will accept it without unnecessary struggle. Over time, this habit becomes a form of inner strength. Obstacles still appear, sometimes unexpectedly and sometimes repeatedly, but the mind no longer feels trapped by them. It knows exactly where to invest attention and effort. Every challenge becomes a question of responsibility rather than helplessness. Friends, once this way of thinking takes root, the path through adversity begins to feel more manageable. You stop trying to reshape the entire world and start refining your own responses to it. The result is not passive acceptance, but focused action, action guided by clarity, patience, and the quiet confidence that while many things lie beyond your reach, the most important ones never have. Once the mind begins to understand what truly lies within its control, a quiet shift starts to happen in the way time itself is experienced. Much of human stress is born from living in places where life is not actually happening, either replaying the past with regret or projecting fears into the future. Yet every meaningful action, every decision, every step toward growth can only occur in one place, the present moment. Friends, the Stoic philosophers understood this deeply. They believed that clarity, discipline, and strength are all rooted in the ability to fully inhabit the moment in front of you. Consider how often the mind drifts away from the reality of the present. A mistake made yesterday continues to echo through your thoughts, draining energy long after the event has passed. At the same time, Uncertainty about tomorrow begins creating anxiety about outcomes that have not even arrived. In this way, the mind becomes divided between two timelines that cannot be changed or controlled. Meanwhile, the only moment where action is possible, the present, is quietly ignored. Living in the present moment is not about ignoring the past or neglecting the future. The past offers lessons, and the future offers direction. But true power exists only in the moment where your attention and effort can be applied. When the mind anchors itself here, something remarkable happens. Problems that once felt overwhelming begin to break down into manageable steps. Instead of worrying about the entire journey, you focus on the next move. I often imagine the present moment as the only piece of ground you can actually stand on. Everything behind you has already been walked. Everything ahead is still invisible. But this step right here, this moment, is solid. This is where discipline is practiced, where decisions are made, where resilience becomes real. When attention remains grounded here, obstacles lose the ability to paralyze progress. Friends, many people become discouraged because they attempt to carry the weight of the entire future at once. Entrepreneurs worry about whether their ideas will succeed years from now. Students fear whether their efforts will lead to the life they hope for. Athletes imagine every possible failure before the competition even begins. Yet the Stoic mindset reminds us that the future is shaped through small, deliberate actions taken now. In this audiobook journey, the power of the present moment becomes a steady guide through adversity. Each obstacle becomes less intimidating when viewed through the lens of immediate action. Instead of asking how you will overcome every challenge ahead, the question becomes simpler. What is the next step I can take right now? This focus sharpens the mind. Distractions lose their influence. Emotional reactions begin to fade because attention is no longer trapped in imagined outcomes. You begin to notice details that were once overlooked, the small opportunities hidden inside the current moment, the adjustments that can be made, the lessons that appear only when you slow down enough to observe. Living in the present moment also strengthens patience. Growth rarely happens instantly. Success is built through repeated effort applied consistently over time. When the mind constantly races ahead to the final outcome, impatience grows quickly. But when attention returns to the present step, progress begins to feel natural. Each action becomes meaningful because it contributes to the larger direction you are building. Sometimes I pause and remind myself that every great achievement in history was built this way, one decision at a time, one disciplined action at a time, one moment of persistence following another. The future that once seemed distant was shaped entirely by how someone chose to act in the present. Friends, there is a quiet calm that develops when this understanding takes hold. The mind stops chasing distant worries and begins engaging fully with the task in front of it. Obstacles become challenges to address today rather than fears about tomorrow. Effort becomes focused, deliberate, and steady. Gradually, the present moment transforms from something easily overlooked into something deeply powerful. It becomes the place where resilience is practiced, where perspective remains clear, and where progress quietly takes shape. In that grounded space, step by step, action by action, the path forward begins to unfold with a steady rhythm that carries you calmly through difficulty and steadily toward growth. The moment you begin grounding yourself in the present, something interesting starts to happen to the mind. The noise of regret fades, the pressure of distant outcomes softens, and in that quiet space a new possibility appears, the ability to think differently. Obstacles that once seemed fixed and immovable begin to reveal hidden angles, alternative paths, unexpected solutions. Friends, this is where the Stoic mindset truly becomes powerful. because the obstacle itself has not changed, but the mind observing it has become more flexible, more curious, more strategic. Most people approach problems with a narrow frame of thinking. They see the obstacle exactly as it first appears and immediately assume that its initial form defines the entire situation. A rejection means failure. A delay means progress has stopped. A limitation means the goal must be abandoned. Yet the disciplined mind understands that these interpretations are only one possible way of seeing the event. When perception becomes flexible, the obstacle begins to look less like a barrier and more like a puzzle waiting to be solved. I often remind myself that innovation, resilience, and leadership all begin with the willingness to question the obvious interpretation of a problem. The entrepreneurs who reshape industries rarely succeed because conditions were perfect. They succeed because they saw opportunities where others saw inconvenience. A closed door becomes a signal to build a new entrance. A shortage becomes motivation to create a better system. What looks like resistance from one angle becomes raw material for creativity from another. Friends, thinking differently does not require extraordinary intelligence. It requires the courage to pause before accepting the first conclusion that comes to mind. The brain loves shortcuts. It quickly labels situations as good or bad, success or failure, possible or impossible. But those labels often hide the deeper possibilities inside the challenge. When the mind slows down and examines the situation carefully, the range of potential responses expands dramatically. This shift in thinking is especially powerful during adversity. When circumstances feel difficult, the instinct is often to retreat or react emotionally. Yet the Stoic approach encourages a different response. Instead of asking why the obstacle exists, the mind begins asking how it might be used. How can this challenge strengthen discipline? How can this setback reveal weaknesses that can now be improved? How can this delay create space for better preparation? In moments like these, a subtle but important transformation takes place. The obstacle stops being the enemy. It becomes part of the strategy. The problem itself begins to contribute to the solution. What once felt like resistance starts to function as guidance, directing attention toward areas where growth is necessary. I remember hearing stories of leaders who faced extreme pressure during moments of crisis. While others focused entirely on the danger, these individuals searched for opportunities hidden within the chaos. They understood that adversity often forces clarity. It removes unnecessary distractions and reveals what truly matters. Under pressure, priorities sharpen and creative thinking becomes essential. This mindset also protects the mind from despair. When the brain is trained to look for alternative interpretations, discouragement loses much of its power. Failure stops feeling permanent because it becomes only one step in a much larger process of learning and adaptation. The obstacle becomes feedback rather than a final verdict. Friends, in this audiobook journey through resilience and self-mastery, thinking differently becomes a powerful tool for navigating uncertainty. It encourages curiosity where frustration once lived. It encourages patience where urgency once created panic. Slowly, the mind becomes more comfortable with complexity, more willing to experiment, more capable of turning pressure into progress. Sometimes the most powerful shift is simply the realization that the obstacle may not be standing in the way at all. It may actually be guiding you toward a path that would never have been discovered otherwise. A failed plan can reveal a better strategy. A closed opportunity can redirect energy toward a more meaningful goal. As this habit of flexible thinking deepens, the mind becomes less intimidated by challenges and more intrigued by them. Obstacles begin to resemble riddles rather than walls. The path forward may not always be obvious, but the confidence to explore new perspectives begins to grow stronger. Gradually, the landscape of difficulty transforms. The same situations that once created frustration now invite creativity and strategy. Each challenge becomes an invitation to adjust perception, refine action, and strengthen the inner discipline that allows progress to continue, even when the road ahead demands a completely different way of thinking. Once the mind begins to think differently about obstacles, something subtle yet powerful unfolds. The same difficulty that once appeared as a dead end starts revealing hidden layers of possibility. What looked like resistance begins to resemble a doorway that simply requires a different approach. Friends, this is the moment where adversity stops being an enemy and begins to reveal its quiet purpose. Because obstacles do not merely block the path forward. Often they reshape it, refine it, and redirect it towards something stronger. Most people encounter a challenge and immediately search for a way around it. The instinct is understandable. Difficulty is uncomfortable. Uncertainty is unsettling, and the mind naturally wants relief. Yet the Stoic perspective offers a different invitation. Instead of rushing to escape the obstacle, it encourages us to study it. Look closely at the pressure it creates, the limitations it exposes, the skills it demands. Inside those details often lies an opportunity that could never appear without the presence of the challenge itself. Consider how many breakthroughs are born directly from hardship. A struggling entrepreneur is forced to rethink strategy and discovers a more efficient way of building a business. A rejected idea pushes someone to refine their thinking until it becomes stronger than it was before. An unexpected setback forces patience and reflection, creating wisdom that would have been impossible to gain in comfort. The obstacle does not simply stand in the way of progress. It becomes the very material from which progress is shaped. This way of thinking transforms the emotional relationship with difficulty. Instead of reacting with frustration, the mind becomes curious. Instead of asking why something went wrong, attention turns toward what the situation might be offering. Curiosity opens doors that frustration keeps closed. When the mind searches for opportunity rather than blame, it begins noticing possibilities that would otherwise remain invisible. Sometimes those opportunities appear in surprising forms. A delay becomes a chance to prepare more thoroughly. A limitation becomes the spark for creativity. A difficult competitor becomes the motivation to raise standards and sharpen discipline. Each obstacle quietly demands growth, pushing the mind to expand beyond its previous limits. The remarkable truth is that many of the qualities people admire most, resilience, innovation, patience, determination, are rarely developed during comfortable periods of life. They are forged during moments when circumstances demand adaptation. The obstacle becomes a kind of teacher, presenting lessons that cannot be learned in any other environment. Friends, imagine approaching adversity with this mindset. Instead of seeing the obstacle as something unfortunate that must be endured, you begin to view it as a challenge designed to strengthen your ability to respond. The focus shifts away from what is lost and toward what can still be gained. Even in difficult moments, there is always something to improve, something to learn, something to build. This shift does not eliminate hardship. Challenges still test patience, discipline, and endurance. Yet the emotional weight of those moments changes when the mind understands that opportunity may be hidden inside the very struggle it is facing. The obstacle becomes less intimidating because it now carries the potential for progress. Over time, this habit of searching for opportunity becomes almost instinctive. The mind no longer freezes when difficulty appears. Instead, it begins exploring the situation with thoughtful attention. What advantage might be hidden here? What strength can be developed? What new path could this moment reveal? Gradually, the landscape of adversity begins to feel different. Obstacles still stand along the road, but they no longer resemble barriers that must simply be endured. They begin to look like turning points, moments where the path of growth quietly opens for those patient enough to look beyond the surface and discover the opportunity waiting within the challenge itself. The mind begins to recognize opportunity inside adversity. A natural question quietly follows: what must be done next? Because insight alone is never enough. Understanding an obstacle does not move you past it. Seeing opportunity inside difficulty is powerful, but that vision only matters when it leads to action. Friends, this is where the philosophy of resilience becomes practical. The obstacle is no longer something to analyze endlessly. It becomes something to engage with, something that calls for movement, effort, and deliberate response. Many people pause at the stage of realization. They see the challenge clearly. They understand the lesson hidden inside it, yet hesitation appears. Fear whispers about risk, uncertainty raises doubts, and the mind begins searching for perfect conditions before taking the first step. But the Stoic mindset offers a powerful reminder: perfect conditions rarely arrive. Progress is built by those who are willing to move forward even when the path is incomplete and the outcome remains uncertain. Preparation to act does not mean reckless motion. It means cultivating the discipline required to move thoughtfully and steadily through resistance. Obstacles often demand patience, planning, and strategy. They require a willingness to work through complications step by step without expecting instant results. The mind that is prepared for action understands that progress is rarely dramatic. More often it is built through small, consistent efforts applied with determination over time. I sometimes imagine adversity as a mountain path. From a distance, the climb looks overwhelming. The summit appears impossibly far away, and the terrain seems difficult to navigate. Yet once the climber takes the first step, something changes. The path begins revealing itself piece by piece. Each movement forward provides new perspective, new information, and new confidence. Action transforms uncertainty into direction. Friends, preparation for action also requires emotional discipline. Obstacles often trigger impatience. The desire for quick solutions can tempt the mind into rushing or abandoning the process altogether. Yet meaningful achievements rarely emerge from haste. Strategic patience becomes essential. It allows effort to remain focused even when progress appears slow. Think about the leaders who guide organizations through moments of crisis or uncertainty. Their success rarely depends on dramatic bursts of energy. Instead, it grows from steady commitment to thoughtful action. They evaluate the situation carefully, make deliberate decisions, and continue moving forward even when the outcome remains unclear. Each step builds momentum, and over time that momentum begins to reshape the circumstances around them. Preparation also means accepting that mistakes will occur along the way. Action does not guarantee immediate success. Sometimes the first attempt fails. Sometimes the path must be adjusted. Yet failure within action is far more valuable than hesitation without movement. Each attempt provides information that sharpens strategy and strengthens resilience. The remarkable thing about disciplined action is that it changes the relationship between you and the obstacle. What once looked immovable begins to respond to effort. The challenge may not disappear instantly, but it begins to shift. Progress appears in small signs. A problem understood more clearly, a skill improved, a path discovered where none seemed visible before. Friends, action has a way of dissolving fear as well. Anxiety thrives in moments of hesitation, when the mind imagines endless possibilities without taking steps to test them. Once movement begins, imagination gives way to experience. The unknown becomes familiar terrain. Gradually, the obstacle transforms from something intimidating into something manageable. Each deliberate step builds confidence. Each effort reinforces the belief that challenges can be worked through rather than avoided. In this way, the journey through adversity continues unfolding. Understanding creates awareness. Awareness reveals opportunity. Opportunity invites preparation. And preparation, when joined with steady action, begins to carve a path forward, one step at a time, guided not by perfect certainty, but by the quiet determination to keep moving through the resistance until the road ahead becomes clearer. Once preparation turns into movement, a deeper truth begins to reveal itself. Action is not merely about taking steps. It is about cultivating the discipline to keep moving even when progress feels slow, uncertain, or uncomfortable. Many people are capable of beginning. The real challenge appears after the excitement fades, when obstacles still stand in the way and the results are not yet visible. Friends, this is where the discipline of action separates those who dream from those who transform adversity into real progress. Action guided by discipline is very different from bursts of motivation. Motivation is emotional, unpredictable, and temporary. It appears easily when circumstances are inspiring, but it disappears just as quickly when the road becomes difficult. Discipline, however, is steady. It is the quiet decision to continue showing up regardless of mood, fear, or temporary setbacks. In the Stoic tradition, this kind of consistency becomes the foundation of resilience. Imagine someone facing a demanding challenge, a startup founder navigating uncertainty, an athlete pushing through exhausting training, a leader guiding others during a crisis. The obstacle in front of them does not move simply because they understand it or because they wish it away. It responds only to effort. Yet effort alone is not enough. It must be directed, repeated, and sustained. This is why the discipline of action focuses on small, deliberate movements forward. Each step may appear insignificant at first. A single adjustment to a strategy, a single day of focused work, a single attempt to improve a skill. Yet when these steps are repeated consistently, they begin to accumulate into something powerful. Momentum quietly builds. What once looked like an impossible barrier begins to wear down under the persistence of thoughtful effort. Friends, obstacles often test patience as much as they test ability. When progress does not appear immediately, frustration can tempt the mind to abandon the effort entirely. This is where emotional discipline must work together with action. Instead of reacting impulsively, the disciplined mind reminds itself that meaningful change requires time. The obstacle is not defeated through sudden force, but through steady pressure applied day after day. I sometimes think of water flowing over stone. At first, the rock appears immovable, solid and resistant. But water does not attempt to destroy it instantly. It simply continues moving, drop by drop, moment by moment. Over time, the shape of the stone begins to change. The same principle guides disciplined action in life. Persistence gradually reshapes the conditions that once seemed fixed. This mindset also changes how failure is interpreted. When action is driven by discipline rather than ego, mistakes become part of the process rather than reasons to stop. Each unsuccessful attempt reveals information that sharpens the next one. Strategy improves. Understanding deepens. The obstacle itself becomes a teacher guiding the next move. Leaders who practice this philosophy rarely rely on dramatic gestures. Instead, they commit to consistent effort even during uncertainty. They understand that action does not always feel heroic in the moment. Sometimes it feels ordinary, repetitive, even exhausting. Yet it is precisely this quiet consistency that gradually transforms challenges into achievements. Friends, the discipline of action strengthens something deeper than external results. It builds self-mastery. Every time you choose effort over avoidance, focus over distraction, patience over frustration, you reinforce the belief that obstacles can be worked through. Confidence grows not from easy victories, but from repeated proof that you are capable of continuing forward. Gradually, the relationship with adversity begins to change. Obstacles still appear, sometimes unexpectedly, sometimes repeatedly, but they no longer create the same hesitation. The mind understands that progress is built through action sustained over time. What once looked like a wall now feels more like terrain to navigate. The steps may be small, the journey demanding, but the rhythm of disciplined effort continues carrying you forward, one deliberate movement at a time, steadily transforming resistance into the very path that leads you onward. The rhythm of disciplined action eventually leads to a simple but powerful realization. Progress favors movement. Waiting for perfect clarity, perfect timing, or perfect confidence often becomes another form of hesitation. Obstacles grow heavier when the mind stands still too long, examining every possible outcome without committing to the next step. Yet the moment movement begins, something subtle changes. Energy shifts. Uncertainty becomes manageable. The path that once looked impossible begins to reveal itself piece by piece. Friends, the philosophy of resilience reminds us that forward motion, no matter how small, is often the first real victory over adversity. Many people imagine that success requires dramatic leaps or extraordinary bursts of effort. In reality, meaningful progress is far more ordinary and far more persistent. It is built from movement that continues even when enthusiasm fades, even when results are not immediately visible. The Stoic mindset encourages exactly this kind of persistence. It teaches that the obstacle does not disappear because we wish it away. It responds only to steady engagement. When you begin moving toward a challenge, the obstacle itself starts to reveal useful information. What once looked like a solid wall becomes a landscape of details, openings, and possibilities. Problems that seemed overwhelming from a distance often shrink once action brings you closer to them. Fear tends to exaggerate difficulty when the mind is standing still. Movement replaces imagination with experience. I often think about how many great journeys begin with a step that feels almost insignificant. An entrepreneur deciding to test a new idea despite uncertainty. A student opening a book and beginning the slow work of learning. A leader facing criticism yet choosing to continue building something meaningful. These actions may not look impressive from the outside, but they hold tremendous power. They signal the refusal to remain stuck. Friends, getting moving also changes the way the mind experiences fear. When hesitation dominates, fear grows louder because it has nothing to compete with. Thoughts multiply, doubts expand. But once action begins, attention shifts from worrying about outcomes to engaging with the process itself. The mind becomes occupied with solving real problems rather than imagining them. In this audiobook journey through adversity, the idea of movement carries an important message. Obstacles are rarely defeated by a single heroic moment. More often they are worn down through steady effort applied day after day. Each step forward strengthens resilience. Each attempt refines strategy. Each small victory, sometimes as simple as refusing to give up, adds momentum to the path ahead. There is also a deeper psychological transformation that happens through movement. Confidence does not appear before action. It grows because of action. Every time you choose to move despite uncertainty, you prove something important to yourself. You demonstrate that difficulty does not have the authority to freeze your progress. That realization becomes a powerful source of inner strength. Of course, movement does not guarantee that every step will succeed. Sometimes the direction must be adjusted. Sometimes an attempt leads to failure before leading to improvement. Yet, even those moments contribute to progress because they provide experience that cannot be gained through observation alone. Friends, adversity often tests patience and endurance, but it also rewards those who remain willing to engage with the challenge directly. The obstacle may still demand effort, creativity, and discipline, yet it loses much of its power when you refuse to remain still. Gradually, as movement continues, the road begins to take shape. What once felt uncertain becomes familiar terrain. The obstacle that seemed overwhelming from a distance starts to shrink behind you, step by step, replaced by the quiet realization that progress rarely requires perfection. Only the courage to keep moving forward even when the destination has not fully come into view. Friends, there comes a quiet moment in every difficult journey when enthusiasm fades, when the excitement of the beginning is long gone, when the path ahead looks longer than it did on the first day, and it is right there, in that silent stretch between hope and exhaustion, where the real test of persistence begins, because persistence is not loud, it is not dramatic, it is not the heroic moment people celebrate. Persistence is slow, stubborn movement forward when every emotion is telling you to stop. And I want you to understand something important, my friend. The world rarely rewards the fastest person, but it almost always rewards the person who simply refuses to quit. When I speak about persistence in this audiobook journey, I am not talking about blind stubbornness. I am talking about disciplined endurance, the quiet decision to keep working when progress is invisible, because the Stoic mind understands something powerful. Obstacles are rarely defeated in a single strike. They are worn down through patience, clarity, and repeated effort. Think about the entrepreneur who faces rejection after rejection, the athlete whose body aches after endless training sessions, the student staring at a difficult problem long after others have walked away. What separates those who eventually succeed from those who disappear is rarely talent alone. It is the ability to continue acting despite frustration, despite doubt, despite temporary failure. Persistence begins with perception, because if you see difficulty as a signal to retreat, you will retreat. But if you train your mind to see difficulty as proof that you are standing at the edge of growth, something changes inside you. The obstacle stops feeling like an enemy and starts feeling like a teacher. I have learned, friends, that every challenge carries two voices within it. One voice whispers that the situation is unfair, impossible, exhausting, that you should step back, protect yourself, choose the easier road. But the other voice, the Stoic voice, calmly asks a different question. What can be done right now, with what I have, in this moment? Persistence is simply choosing to listen to that second voice. Because action, even small action, changes the landscape of difficulty. It transforms frustration into momentum, confusion into clarity, weakness into strength. And often the greatest victories in life are built from hundreds of small actions that looked insignificant at the time. Consider the leaders who navigated crises, the innovators who reshaped industries, the thinkers who transformed ideas into reality. None of them escaped adversity. None of them avoided exhaustion. Yet they shared a common discipline. They kept moving. They kept adjusting. They kept learning. You see, persistence is not about forcing reality to bend to your will overnight. It is about returning again and again with calm strategy, with emotional discipline, with the patience to let time become your ally. Sometimes the obstacle delays you. Sometimes it humiliates you. Sometimes it forces you to rebuild everything from the ground up. But the Stoic mind does not waste energy complaining about the uncontrollable. It asks only one question that truly matters. What is still within my control? Your effort is within your control. Your attitude is within your control. Your willingness to stand up again tomorrow is within your control. And once you accept that truth, something powerful happens, because persistence stops feeling like suffering and starts feeling like strength, like a quiet form of mastery over yourself. Friends, the world may see only the final breakthrough, the moment of recognition, the victory after years of struggle. But those who live this journey know the deeper truth, that persistence itself changes you long before it changes your circumstances. It sharpens your thinking. It strengthens your character. It teaches patience where impatience once lived. And slowly, almost invisibly, the obstacle that once seemed immovable begins to shift, not because it became smaller, but because you became stronger, steadier, more resilient. So when the path feels long, when progress feels painfully slow, remember this simple truth. My friend, persistence is not about racing forward. It is about refusing to step backward. It is about showing up again and again and again until time itself begins to respect your effort. Momentum has a strange way of revealing truth, because once you begin moving with persistence, once you refuse to retreat from difficulty, you quickly discover something important that many people overlook. Progress is rarely perfect on the first attempt. Movement exposes flaws, effort reveals weaknesses, and action often produces unexpected results. Yet this is not failure. This is information. This is the quiet invitation to refine your path. This is where the discipline of iteration begins. You see, friend, the Stoic mind does not expect the first plan to be flawless. The Stoic understands that reality is complex, that circumstances shift, that pressure reveals gaps in our thinking. Instead of resisting this truth, the wise individual adapts. They observe, adjust, and move again. Iteration is simply the courage to improve the attempt rather than abandon the mission. Imagine a craftsman shaping stone. The first strike of the chisel does not reveal the statue hidden inside the rock. It merely removes a fragment. The next strike adjusts the angle. The next one deepens the shape. Slowly, patiently, the image begins to emerge. Each strike is guided by feedback from the previous one. Without that feedback, there is no refinement. Without refinement, there is no masterpiece. Life operates the same way. Entrepreneurs test ideas that fail before discovering the model that works. Athletes experiment with training methods before unlocking peak performance. Leaders make difficult decisions under uncertainty, adjusting their strategies as reality unfolds. The process is not clean. It is not linear, but it is powerful. Many people misinterpret obstacles because they expect clarity before action. They wait for certainty. They wait for the perfect plan. Yet the Stoic approach is the opposite. Action creates clarity. Effort reveals the path forward. The obstacle itself becomes the feedback mechanism that sharpens your thinking. This is why emotional discipline matters so deeply in the face of setbacks. When an attempt fails, the untrained mind reacts with frustration or embarrassment. It interprets the outcome as a judgment of ability. But a strategic mind pauses and asks a better question. What did this attempt teach me? That single question transforms failure into progress. In this audiobook journey we are walking together, I want you to see iteration not as correction, but as evolution. Each attempt strengthens your understanding. Each adjustment sharpens your perception. Each refined action moves you closer to the result you seek. Look closely at the people who build extraordinary things. Their achievements are rarely the product of a single brilliant move. Instead, They are the result of countless refinements. Small improvements layered over time. Decisions revisited. Assumptions tested. Strategies reshaped. Iteration demands humility because it requires admitting that your first approach may not be enough. Yet it also demands courage because it requires continuing forward even when the outcome is uncertain. This combination, humility and courage, is the foundation of true resilience. There is another quiet strength hidden in this process. Iteration keeps the mind calm under pressure. When you accept that improvement comes through adjustment, the obstacle stops feeling like a verdict. It becomes a workshop, a place where strategy is refined and discipline is sharpened. Think about the calm strategist studying a difficult battlefield, observing each move carefully, adjusting tactics after every engagement. Victory is not achieved through stubborn repetition. It is achieved through intelligent persistence, through learning faster than the challenge evolves. So when your path becomes complicated, when your effort does not immediately deliver the result you expected, do not interpret that moment as defeat. See it as a signal to adjust your approach. Examine the outcome. Refine the method. Take another step. Because the remarkable truth, friend, is that the obstacle rarely disappears all at once. Instead, it slowly transforms as you interact with it. Each attempt reshapes the situation. Each lesson strengthens your capacity. Over time, something extraordinary happens. The person who began this journey uncertain and cautious becomes someone sharper, calmer, more deliberate. Not because the road became easier, but because the process of iteration quietly turns struggle into wisdom and effort into mastery. Refinement slowly changes the way a person sees effort, because once you understand that improvement comes through repeated adjustment, something inside your thinking becomes quieter, steadier, more deliberate. And this is the moment when another powerful realization begins to take shape. Progress is not built on dramatic breakthroughs, but on disciplined commitment to the process itself. The Stoic mind understands that results are uncertain, outcomes are unpredictable, yet the process, the daily actions, the steady focus, the quiet discipline, that is always within reach. So as we move deeper into this journey together, I want you to imagine something simple, friend. Imagine a craftsman entering his workshop before sunrise. The room is silent. The tools are waiting. The work ahead is difficult and slow. Yet he does not walk in thinking about applause, recognition, or the final masterpiece that may appear years from now. His attention rests on something far more practical: the angle of the blade, the steadiness of the hand, the patience required to shape something meaningful from raw material. This is the power of following the process. Many people suffer unnecessary frustration because they attach their peace of mind to results they cannot fully control. A startup founder cannot control market reactions. An athlete cannot control the decisions of referees. A leader navigating a crisis cannot control the unpredictable movements of the world around them. What they can control is preparation, effort, discipline, and the clarity of their thinking. The Stoic philosophy teaches a powerful distinction between what belongs to us and what does not. Our actions belong to us. Our judgments belong to us. Our commitment belongs to us. Everything else, outcomes, praise, criticism, fortune, lies outside our command. Once this truth becomes real to you, something remarkable happens. Pressure begins to lose its grip. Anxiety loosens its hold. Because instead of obsessing over distant results, your attention returns to the small actions happening right now. I have often noticed that the strongest individuals are not the ones constantly chasing victory. They are the ones devoted to doing their work well, regardless of the circumstances. They show up when motivation fades. They train when nobody is watching. They refine their thinking even when progress appears slow. The world sees their success later, but the foundation was built quietly through loyalty to the process. This discipline becomes especially powerful during adversity. When obstacles appear, and they always do, people who rely only on motivation quickly become discouraged. Their energy collapses when progress stalls. Yet those who follow the process remain steady, because their focus is not on immediate success, but on consistent effort. The entrepreneur continues improving the product. The athlete continues training the body. The leader continues making thoughtful decisions. Each action becomes a brick laid carefully in the structure of long-term achievement. Friends, the process is where character is built. It is where emotional discipline develops. It is where patience grows stronger than frustration. When you commit yourself to the process, every obstacle becomes part of the training ground rather than an interruption. Even failure begins to change its meaning. Failure stops feeling like an end and starts becoming information, a signal that something must be refined, something must be strengthened, something must be approached differently tomorrow. Over time, this mindset produces a kind of quiet confidence that cannot easily be shaken. Not the loud confidence built on temporary success, but the deeper confidence that comes from knowing you will continue working regardless of difficulty. And that, my friends, is where inner strength begins to reveal itself. Because when a person stops chasing shortcuts and instead commits to the long road of disciplined progress, something powerful unfolds inside them. The work itself becomes meaningful. The effort becomes the reward. Each day of focused action becomes proof that you are shaping something far greater than immediate results. You are shaping the kind of mind that can endure storms, adapt to pressure, and move forward with calm determination long after others have grown tired. So when the road ahead feels uncertain, return your attention to the process. Do the work in front of you. Think clearly. Act deliberately. Let patience guide your effort. And slowly, almost invisibly at first, the results that once felt distant begin to appear, not because you chased them desperately, but because you built the habits, the discipline, and the steady mind required to reach them. The discipline of following the process slowly shapes a different kind of mindset, one that becomes less distracted by outcomes and more devoted to the responsibility of the moment. And once a person begins to understand this rhythm of steady effort, another powerful principle quietly rises into view: the simple, demanding, often overlooked practice of doing your job and doing it right. Because when pressure builds and obstacles appear, people often look for dramatic solutions, grand strategies, or sudden breakthroughs. Yet the Stoic perspective brings us back to something far more grounded and practical. It asks a simple question: what is the task in front of you right now? And are you doing it with full attention and discipline? Friend, much of the chaos people experience in difficult moments does not come from the obstacle itself, but from scattered focus. The mind jumps ahead to the outcome, worries about reputation, fears criticism, imagines failure, and suddenly the present task becomes clouded by emotion. Yet calm thinkers, the kind of individuals who move steadily through crisis, practice something very different. They narrow their attention. They simplify the battlefield of their mind. I have learned that clarity often begins with responsibility. Not the overwhelming responsibility of controlling the entire future, but the precise responsibility of executing the next action correctly. This may sound simple, almost obvious, yet in practice it requires remarkable discipline. Consider the surgeon inside an operating room during a critical procedure. The surgeon cannot afford to become lost in thoughts about reputation, awards, or mistakes from the past. The only thing that matters is the next precise movement of the hands, the next careful decision, the next measured breath. In moments of extreme pressure, Mastery reveals itself through calm execution of the task at hand. Life presents us with similar moments, though they may appear in different forms. A founder navigating uncertainty must focus on improving the product and serving the customer. An athlete preparing for competition must focus on training, recovery, and precision. A leader guiding others through turmoil must focus on clear communication and thoughtful decisions. The Stoic mind refuses to waste energy on things outside its control. Instead, it concentrates on doing the work well. This idea carries a quiet strength that many people underestimate. When you commit yourself fully to the job in front of you, distractions lose their power. Doubt becomes less intimidating. Even fear begins to shrink, because your attention has been redirected toward action rather than speculation. In this audiobook journey we are walking together, I want you to see this principle as a form of mental armor. When the world becomes noisy, when criticism appears, when uncertainty surrounds you, return your focus to the work itself. Ask yourself a grounding question. What does doing this job correctly look like right now? Not tomorrow. Not in some distant ideal future. Right now? Sometimes that means making the difficult phone call. Sometimes it means revising the plan again. Sometimes it means quietly improving your craft when nobody else notices. None of these actions are glamorous, but they are powerful, because excellence is rarely built in dramatic moments. It is built in ordinary moments handled with extraordinary care. Friends, the individuals who eventually rise above adversity often share a quiet habit. They do not allow frustration to turn them careless. They do not allow pressure to make them reckless. Instead, they slow down, breathe, and commit themselves to precision. One task completed well leads to the next. One thoughtful action builds the foundation for another. Over time, the results compound in ways that appear almost mysterious from the outside. Yet from the inside, the truth is simple. A steady mind, clear focus, and the humble discipline of doing the work the right way, even when the world is watching, even when the world is not. In those quiet moments of responsibility, something deeper begins to form within you, a kind of inner authority, a confidence not built on applause, but on the knowledge that whatever challenge stands before you, you will meet it the same way every time, by doing your job and doing it right. That quiet discipline of doing the job correctly eventually begins to sharpen something deeper in the mind. Because when a person consistently focuses on the work in front of them instead of chasing distractions, they start seeing reality more clearly, almost like a fog lifting from the landscape. And with that clarity comes another powerful skill that separates calm thinkers from frustrated dreamers: the ability to practice pragmatism. You see, friend, the Stoic mind is not interested in wishful thinking. It does not waste time imagining how things should be. Instead, it calmly examines how things actually are. This shift may seem small, but it changes everything. Because once you accept reality as it stands, without denial, without emotional exaggeration, you finally gain the ability to work with it rather than fight against it. Many people suffer not because the obstacle is impossible, but because they insist on approaching it with rigid expectations. They cling to a plan that no longer fits the circumstances. They defend an idea that reality has already disproven. They confuse pride with strength. Yet pragmatism quietly dissolves that resistance. It asks a simple but powerful question: what works? In the real world, progress rarely belongs to the person with the most elegant theory. It belongs to the person who adapts quickly, who adjusts strategy, who understands that results matter more than attachment to an idea. Think of a leader navigating a sudden crisis. The environment shifts rapidly. Conditions change. Resources disappear. A rigid mind collapses under that pressure because it cannot adjust. But the pragmatic thinker steps back, studies the situation, and calmly asks what can be done with what is available right now. This is not weakness. This is strategic intelligence. Pragmatism transforms obstacles into raw material. It teaches you to stop waiting for ideal circumstances and start working with the circumstances you actually have. It replaces frustration with creativity. In this audiobook journey, I often remind friends that adversity does not only test your strength, it tests your flexibility. The obstacle may demand that you change direction. It may force you to redesign your approach. It may even require abandoning a plan that once seemed brilliant. A stubborn ego interprets this as defeat. A pragmatic mind interprets it as evolution. History is filled with individuals who succeeded not because they followed their original plan perfectly, but because they adjusted with intelligence. Entrepreneurs pivot businesses. Scientists revise hypotheses. Generals adapt tactics when the battlefield changes. Progress belongs to those who are willing to refine reality instead of arguing with it. This is where emotional discipline becomes essential. Because the ego loves to protect its ideas. The ego wants to be right. It wants recognition for its cleverness. Yet the Stoic approach values effectiveness over ego. If a different method works better, adopt it. If the obstacle reveals a weakness in your strategy, improve it. If the path forward requires humility, embrace it. Pragmatism is not about lowering standards. It is about raising awareness. It demands that you stay focused on the ultimate objective rather than becoming emotionally attached to a particular method. When this mindset becomes natural, frustration begins to lose its power. Instead of reacting to difficulty with anger or disappointment, you start responding with curiosity. The obstacle becomes a puzzle rather than a punishment. And slowly, something fascinating happens inside your thinking. You begin to see opportunities hidden inside constraints. Limited resources become a challenge that sharpens creativity. Unexpected resistance becomes a signal pointing toward a smarter approach. Friends, life rarely unfolds exactly as we imagine. Yet those who learn to navigate reality with clear eyes and steady patience often move further than those who insist the world must conform to their expectations. Because while others are arguing with circumstances, the pragmatic thinker is already working within them, quietly reshaping the situation piece by piece, discovering solutions where others only see frustration. And in that calm, adaptable mindset, something powerful takes root. A quiet confidence that no matter how unpredictable the path becomes, you will always find a way forward, not through stubborn fantasy, but through thoughtful, grounded, relentless action. Clarity born from pragmatism slowly changes the way we approach resistance. Because once you accept reality instead of arguing with it, your mind becomes flexible, observant, strategic, and that flexibility opens the door to another quiet but powerful insight. Not every obstacle must be attacked head-on. Sometimes the wisest move is to step to the side, to observe the structure of the barrier, and then move around it with calm intelligence rather than brute force. This is where strategy becomes an art, where patience begins to outthink pressure, and where the Stoic mindset reveals the strength hidden inside what might seem like a detour. You see, friend, the world often teaches us a very dramatic image of success. It tells us that strength means charging directly into opposition, that courage means pushing harder than everyone else in the same direction, that victory belongs to the person who refuses to bend. Yet reality tells a quieter story. Many of the greatest breakthroughs in business, leadership, and personal growth have come not from confrontation, but from redirection. Imagine a river meeting a wall of stone. The water does not shatter itself against the rock in frustration. It studies the shape of the terrain. It bends, curves, slides quietly along the edges, and eventually it finds a path forward. Over time, the river reshapes the entire landscape, not through aggression, but through intelligent persistence. The same principle appears again and again in human struggle. An entrepreneur may discover that competing directly with established giants is impossible, so they serve a neglected corner of the market instead. An athlete may face an opponent who is stronger or faster, yet victory appears through a different tactic, a smarter angle, a shift in timing. A leader navigating crisis may realize that forcing a solution will only create more resistance, so they move carefully, influence quietly, and change the situation indirectly. This is the wisdom of approaching a problem from the flank. And here is something fascinating. When the mind becomes disciplined enough to consider alternative paths, obstacles start revealing opportunities that were invisible before. The barrier that once looked like a dead end becomes a signal pointing toward a different route. In this audiobook journey, I often remind friends that strategic thinking requires emotional control. Frustration pushes people toward impulsive decisions. Pride convinces them that changing tactics is a form of weakness. Yet the Stoic thinker is free from that trap because the goal is not to defend the ego. The goal is to achieve progress. Sometimes the direct path is the best path, but sometimes it is the slowest, the most exhausting, the most wasteful use of energy. Wisdom lies in recognizing when to push forward and when to step sideways. History is full of individuals who mastered this art of subtle strategy. They did not waste years smashing against locked doors. Instead, they looked for windows, side entrances, overlooked routes. They studied the system until they discovered leverage points others ignored. This mindset transforms adversity in a remarkable way. Instead of seeing an obstacle as a rigid barrier, you begin to see it as a puzzle with hidden openings. The pressure remains, the difficulty remains, but your approach becomes creative rather than desperate. Friend, there is tremendous calm in knowing you do not have to fight every battle the way others expect you to fight it. You can think. You can observe. You can wait for the right moment to move. Sometimes the most powerful action is the unexpected one. And as this habit develops, something profound begins to grow within you. Your mind stops reacting emotionally to resistance. It becomes strategic, patient, almost architectural in its thinking, quietly designing paths through complexity. Over time, this calm strategic patience becomes a form of inner strength. Because while others exhaust themselves in direct conflict, you are studying the landscape, learning its weaknesses, discovering openings. Then one day the path appears, not because the obstacle vanished, but because you learned to move around it with intelligence, discipline, and the quiet confidence of someone who understands that progress is not always about pushing harder. Sometimes it is simply about seeing the path that others were too impatient to notice. The ability to move around obstacles with strategy gradually changes the way you see resistance itself, because once your mind becomes patient enough to study difficulty rather than react to it, another realization begins to appear, quiet but powerful. Sometimes the obstacle is not merely something to avoid or bypass. Sometimes it can be turned into an advantage. This idea may sound unusual at first, friend, yet the deeper you explore the Stoic mindset, the clearer it becomes that adversity often carries hidden leverage. The very force that seems to block your progress can, with the right perception, become the energy that propels you forward. Think of the martial artist who does not fight strength with strength. When an opponent pushes forward with aggression, the skilled practitioner redirects that momentum. The attacker's force becomes the opening. The resistance becomes the opportunity. Victory emerges not through brute effort, but through awareness and timing. Life offers similar moments again and again, though they rarely appear obvious in the beginning. A setback exposes weaknesses that needed attention. A public failure teaches lessons that quiet success never could. A difficult competitor forces innovation that might never have happened otherwise. When the Stoic thinkers spoke about obstacles becoming the way forward, they were not speaking in poetic exaggeration. They were describing a practical truth about the structure of reality. Pressure reveals possibility. In this audiobook journey, we have walked through the disciplines of perception, action, and resilience. And here those ideas converge in a powerful way. The obstacle stops being an enemy when you begin asking a different kind of question. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" the mind shifts towards something far more constructive. How can this be used? That shift alone changes the entire experience of difficulty. Consider the entrepreneur who faces criticism from customers. A fragile ego hears insult. A strategic mind hears feedback. That criticism becomes the blueprint for improvement. The obstacle becomes a guide. Or imagine the leader confronted by a sudden crisis. A chaotic situation threatens to collapse everything. Yet within that chaos lies a rare opportunity to reveal clarity, to demonstrate calm leadership, to build trust through decisive action. The very pressure that frightens others becomes the stage where character is revealed. This transformation requires emotional discipline, because the instinctive reaction to difficulty is resistance. The mind wants to complain. It wants to retreat. It wants to blame circumstances. But the Stoic approach interrupts that reaction with calm observation. It asks you to pause, to look again, to search for the advantage hidden inside the problem. Often that advantage appears in unexpected forms. Obstacles slow you down just enough to rethink your strategy. Limitations force creativity. Opposition strengthens conviction. Failure teaches patience. Friend, some of the strongest individuals you will ever encounter were not shaped by easy victories. They were shaped by the relentless friction of challenge. Each obstacle became a tool that sharpened their thinking and strengthened their will. When you begin to adopt this perspective, something remarkable happens inside your mindset. Adversity stops feeling like a punishment and starts feeling like training. Each difficulty becomes an opportunity to practice calm thinking, strategic patience, disciplined action. Even pain begins to carry purpose. Because while others may see the obstacle only as a barrier, you begin to recognize the hidden energy within it. Resistance becomes something you can redirect. Pressure becomes something you can transform. Slowly, quietly, the world begins to look different. What once felt like opposition now appears as raw material. What once seemed like misfortune becomes the catalyst for growth. And with each challenge you face, the mind becomes steadier, sharper, more resilient. Until eventually you reach a point where obstacles no longer intimidate you the way they once did. Instead, they spark curiosity. Because deep down, you have learned a powerful truth that changes everything. The same force that blocks the path can also become the force that moves you forward. Once you begin to see that obstacles can actually be used as leverage rather than simply endured, your relationship with difficulty transforms in a profound way. Because the energy that once felt like pressure, frustration, even anger, no longer needs to be wasted in resistance. Instead, it can be directed. It can be shaped. It can be channeled towards something constructive. And that realization opens the door to one of the most powerful disciplines in the Stoic mindset. Learning how to guide your inner energy instead of being controlled by it. You see, friend, every obstacle awakens a storm of emotion inside us. There is the sudden spark of irritation when things do not go according to plan, the rising heat of anger when progress is blocked, the quiet heaviness of doubt when effort seems unnoticed. These emotions are natural. They are part of being human. The mistake many people make is believing that the only way to deal with these emotions is to suppress them or explode with them. But the Stoic thinkers understood something more useful. They realized that emotion itself is not the enemy. Uncontrolled emotion is the enemy. Energy that is scattered through frustration becomes destructive, yet that same energy, if directed with clarity, becomes fuel. Think about the athlete standing at the starting line after a difficult season filled with setbacks. The disappointment, the exhaustion, the memory of failure, all of that energy is present. Yet instead of allowing it to become bitterness, the athlete channels it into preparation, focus, determination. The pain becomes motivation. The frustration becomes intensity. Life offers the same opportunity again and again. In this audiobook journey, we have explored perception, action, persistence, and strategy, and here those lessons converge inside the discipline of emotional direction. Because when adversity appears, your reaction creates the difference between stagnation and progress. Consider the entrepreneur facing rejection from investors. The rejection stings. It shakes confidence. Yet one person allows that rejection to become resentment, while another turns it into resolve, studying the weaknesses in the pitch, refining the strategy, returning stronger the next time. The external event is identical. The internal direction of energy is completely different. This is why emotional discipline is so central to resilience. When you learn to pause before reacting, when you observe your emotional response instead of immediately obeying it, you gain something rare: control over where your energy flows. Anger can sharpen focus. Frustration can inspire innovation. Disappointment can strengthen determination, but only if that energy is directed deliberately. Friends, there is a powerful calm that develops when you realize that no obstacle has the authority to dictate your inner state unless you allow it. The situation may be difficult, unpredictable, even unfair. Yet the way you use your energy remains within your control. The Stoic approach does not demand that you become emotionless. Instead, it invites you to become skillful with your emotions, to treat them the way a skilled craftsman treats raw material. Heat can melt metal or shape it. Pressure can destroy or refine. The difference lies in how the force is applied. When you begin practicing this discipline, something remarkable happens. Challenges that once drained you start to strengthen you. Difficult days that once felt exhausting begin to feel like training grounds. The energy that once scattered your focus becomes concentrated power directed toward meaningful action. Slowly, the mind becomes steadier. The reactions become more thoughtful. The will becomes stronger. And in that steady transformation, friend, you begin to discover a quiet source of strength within yourself. A deep reservoir of focus and determination that grows each time you face adversity and choose not to waste your energy fighting the obstacle emotionally, but instead direct that energy toward moving forward with clarity, purpose, and unshakable resolve. As your energy becomes more disciplined and directed, a new realization quietly takes shape within the mind. Adversity no longer feels like something that simply happens to you. Instead, it begins to look like something you can engage with actively, strategically, even decisively. The moment you learn to channel your emotional energy rather than be consumed by it, hesitation begins to lose its grip, and the natural next step emerges with clarity. It is the moment when a person stops merely reacting to obstacles and begins stepping forward with deliberate action. You see, friend, many people spend enormous portions of their lives in a defensive posture. They wait for problems to arrive before they respond. They brace themselves for difficulty. They prepare themselves to endure. While endurance is important, there is another dimension to resilience that the Stoic mindset reveals: the courage to move first. When you seize the initiative, the relationship between you and the obstacle changes. Instead of allowing circumstances to dictate the rhythm of your progress, you begin shaping the momentum yourself. Even in moments of uncertainty, action creates clarity. Movement exposes possibilities that hesitation keeps hidden. Think about the leader navigating a moment of crisis. Panic spreads quickly in uncertain environments. People look around for signals of stability, for direction, for someone who understands what must be done. The individual who calmly steps forward, gathers the facts, makes a decision, and begins moving the team toward a solution immediately changes the atmosphere. The crisis remains, the difficulty remains, but now momentum exists where confusion once lived. Inaction drains energy. Purposeful action concentrates it. The Stoic thinkers understood that the world rarely rewards passive waiting. Progress belongs to those who are willing to engage the challenge with thoughtful effort. This does not mean reckless movement or blind aggression. It means stepping forward with discipline, with preparation, with the quiet confidence that comes from focusing on what lies within your control. I often remind friends that obstacles have a strange psychological effect. They create the illusion that time has stopped, that progress has frozen, that nothing can be done until the barrier disappears. Yet in reality, movement is almost always possible in some form. A conversation can be started. A strategy can be adjusted. A new skill can be learned. A small step can be taken. That small step matters more than most people realize. Because once motion begins, the mind begins to change. Fear begins to loosen. Doubt begins to fade. The problem that once felt enormous starts revealing its details. And details are where solutions are born. Athletes know this feeling well. The hardest moment is often not the competition itself, but the hesitation before the first move. Once the body is in motion, instincts awaken, focus sharpens, and energy finds direction. Life operates the same way. Friend, this is why the Stoic philosophy places such emphasis on disciplined action. You cannot control every outcome. You cannot eliminate every obstacle. But you can decide how you meet the moment in front of you. Some individuals wait for the perfect conditions before they begin. Others understand that conditions improve because they begin. The offensive mindset is not about aggression. It is about engagement. It is about refusing to surrender your initiative to fear or uncertainty. It is about recognizing that the world often responds to those who move with clarity and determination. As this habit becomes part of your character, something remarkable begins to happen. Obstacles lose their ability to paralyze you. Instead, they trigger focus. They invite strategy. They awaken your willingness to act. Gradually, the path forward begins to reveal itself, not because the journey suddenly becomes easy, but because you have learned to step toward difficulty with calm purpose rather than retreat from it. And with each step taken in that spirit, the distance between challenge and progress grows smaller, until one day you notice that what once felt like resistance has quietly become the very force pushing you forward. Momentum created through decisive action changes something deep inside the mind, because once you begin stepping forward instead of waiting for circumstances to improve, you start understanding a quieter truth about progress. The path ahead will rarely unfold the way you imagine it. Plans shift, strategies fail, opportunities collapse without warning. Yet strangely, this realization does not weaken the Stoic mindset. It strengthens it, because the more clearly you accept the uncertainty of outcomes, the more resilient your effort becomes. Friend, there is a powerful kind of freedom hidden in the expectation that things may not work the first time, or the second, or even the 10th. Many people enter difficult endeavors carrying a silent assumption that effort should quickly produce success. When reality contradicts that belief, discouragement follows almost immediately. They interpret resistance as a signal that something is wrong. But a disciplined mind interprets the situation differently. Failure, delays, and unexpected obstacles are not unusual events. They are the natural environment of meaningful work. The entrepreneur launching a new venture rarely sees instant traction. The athlete chasing mastery endures countless imperfect performances. The leader guiding a team through uncertainty faces decisions that will not always succeed. Understanding this ahead of time changes everything. When you prepare yourself mentally for the possibility that your plans may fail, you remove the shock that failure usually creates. Instead of reacting with frustration, you respond with curiosity. The setback becomes information. The mistake becomes instruction. The obstacle becomes feedback. In this audiobook journey, we have spoken often about perception, and here perception once again becomes decisive. If you expect the world to cooperate with your plans, adversity feels like betrayal. But if you expect resistance, complexity, and uncertainty, each challenge simply becomes part of the process. The Stoic thinkers practiced this mindset deliberately. They trained themselves to imagine setbacks before they occurred, not as a form of pessimism, but as preparation. When the mind rehearses difficulty in advance, it becomes harder to panic when difficulty arrives. And difficulty always arrives. This preparation does not mean abandoning ambition. On the contrary, it makes ambition more durable. Because when the first attempt fails, you are not surprised. When the strategy needs adjustment, you are not discouraged. When the path becomes complicated, your resolve remains steady. Friends, this is the foundation of persistence. I have seen individuals with extraordinary intelligence and talent give up too early simply because they believed success should have appeared sooner. At the same time, I have watched ordinary individuals accomplish remarkable things because they were willing to keep experimenting, adjusting, and trying again long after others walked away. The difference was not brilliance. The difference was endurance. Every attempt teaches something new. Every setback sharpens your understanding of the challenge. Slowly the fog begins to lift. Patterns become visible. Weaknesses reveal themselves. The next strategy becomes slightly stronger than the last. Progress rarely arrives in a straight line. It arrives through iteration. This is why long-term thinkers do not measure their journey by isolated failures. They measure it by the direction of effort. If each attempt brings deeper knowledge, greater skill, stronger discipline, then even the failed attempts are part of forward movement. And over time, this mindset creates a quiet kind of confidence. You stop fearing failure because you know it cannot truly stop you. It can only redirect you. So when you step into the uncertain terrain of ambition, carry this understanding with you, friend. Not everything will work. Many plans will collapse. Some efforts will seem wasted. Yet if your will remains steady, if your perception remains calm, if your discipline keeps you moving forward, those apparent failures slowly transform into the raw material of progress. And one day you realize that the obstacles which once seemed like proof that the journey was impossible were actually the training ground that prepared you to continue walking long after others decided to turn back. The realization that many of our efforts may fail at first quietly prepares the mind for a deeper test, because when repeated attempts still collide with resistance, when plans are exhausted and strategies adjusted again and again, a different kind of strength is required. This is where the mind must rely not only on perception or action, but on something steadier, something deeper, the quiet endurance of the will. You see, friend, there comes a moment in every meaningful pursuit when progress slows to a crawl. The excitement of the beginning fades. The early victories disappear. The road stretches longer than expected. In those moments, talent becomes less important, strategy becomes less dramatic, and what remains is the simple, stubborn decision to continue. This is the discipline of the will. Throughout this audiobook journey, we have spoken about understanding obstacles, working around them, even using them as leverage. Yet there are times when no clever maneuver changes the situation. Some hardships cannot be rushed. Some seasons of life must simply be endured with patience and strength. Stoic philosophy recognizes this reality clearly. The ancient thinkers understood that much of life exists outside our control. The actions of other people, the unpredictable turns of fortune, the sudden arrival of illness, loss, or disappointment. Trying to dominate these uncontrollable forces only exhausts the mind. Instead, the Stoic focuses on the one domain that always remains available, the inner response. When circumstances cannot be changed, the strength of character becomes the decisive factor. The mind chooses calm over panic. It chooses dignity over resentment. It chooses endurance over surrender. And strangely, this quiet endurance becomes a form of power. Consider the athlete recovering from injury, forced to step away from competition while others continue moving forward. Consider the entrepreneur navigating a long stretch of uncertainty while the results remain invisible. Consider the leader guiding people through crisis while carrying doubts and pressures no one else can see. These moments demand something deeper than action. They demand inner steadiness. I often tell friends that resilience is not always loud. Sometimes it is silent. It is the quiet refusal to let hardship define the quality of your character. It is the discipline of waking up each day and continuing your effort even when recognition is absent and the outcome remains unclear. This discipline grows slowly. Each time you face adversity without bitterness, you will become stronger. Each time you endure discomfort without complaint, your patience deepens. Each time you accept what cannot be controlled and focus on what can, your mind becomes more stable. The Stoics believe that this inner stability is the foundation of true freedom. When your peace depends entirely on external success, the world controls your happiness. But when your peace comes from your ability to endure with dignity and clarity, circumstances lose their power over you. Friend, there is tremendous strength in that realization. Life will not always provide favorable conditions. Opportunities will sometimes disappear. Efforts will sometimes fail despite your best preparation. Yet the discipline of the will ensures that these events do not break your spirit. Instead, they become the environment in which your character matures. As the journey continues, you begin to understand something profound. The true victory in any struggle is not merely the external result. The deeper victory is the person you become while enduring the challenge. Patience sharpens judgment. Hardship strengthens resolve. Long effort deepens wisdom. And somewhere along that path, you begin to feel a quiet sense of confidence emerging from within, not because the world has suddenly become easier, but because you have discovered that your will, when disciplined and steady, is capable of carrying you through far more than you once believed possible. As the discipline of the will grows stronger, something remarkable begins to take shape inside you, almost like the slow construction of a quiet fortress that no one else can see. It is not built with stone or steel, but with clarity of thought, steady patience, and emotional discipline. Over time, this inner structure becomes a place you can return to whenever the world grows chaotic, whenever pressure rises, whenever doubt whispers that the struggle is too heavy to continue. The Stoic thinkers described this place with a powerful image, an inner citadel, a stronghold within the mind that cannot be invaded by circumstance. Friend, life outside this inner citadel is unpredictable. Markets rise and fall, Relationships change, plans collapse, opportunities appear and vanish with little warning. Many people try to stabilize their lives by controlling these external forces, but the more they attempt to control the uncontrollable, the more fragile their peace becomes. The Stoic approach offers a different path. Instead of building security in the shifting terrain of the outside world, you build it within yourself. That realization changed the way I think about adversity when I first encountered it. And in moments like this throughout our audiobook journey, I often invite listeners to imagine the mind as a landscape. On one side lies the noise of events, criticism, success, failure, praise, loss, sudden disruption. On the other side stands the quiet ground of your inner character. When that ground is unstable, every external event shakes you. But when it is firm, when it has been shaped by reflection and discipline, the storms of circumstance lose their power to disturb your direction. This is the purpose of the inner citadel. It is built through daily habits of perception and self-mastery. Each time you pause before reacting to anger, another brick is placed in its walls. Each time you accept what cannot be controlled and focus on what can, the foundation becomes stronger. Each time you face difficulty without surrendering your integrity, the structure rises higher. Slowly, the mind begins to recognize that true security does not come from perfect circumstances. It comes from the confidence that whatever circumstances appear, you possess the strength to face them. Consider the leader who must make difficult decisions while criticism surrounds them. The crowd outside the citadel may shout loudly, but inside there is calm reflection. Consider the entrepreneur navigating uncertainty, watching plans shift and markets fluctuate. Within the inner citadel lives patience and strategic clarity. Consider the athlete confronting exhaustion during long training sessions. Inside the citadel waits the quiet voice that reminds them why the journey began. This internal refuge is not an escape from reality. It is the place where reality can be faced without distortion. When emotions rise, you return there to think clearly. When fear appears, you return there to regain perspective. When success arrives, you return there to remain humble and focused. Friends, building this inner structure requires practice, because the modern world constantly invites distraction and emotional reaction. News cycles provoke outrage. Social comparisons provoke insecurity. Rapid changes provoke anxiety. Without discipline, the mind becomes a crowded battlefield where every external influence fights for control. The Stoic path is different. It teaches you to protect your attention, to guard your judgment, to recognize that your inner peace is too valuable to surrender to every passing event. Over time, this quiet discipline transforms the way you experience challenge. Obstacles no longer feel like personal attacks from the universe. They become situations to observe, analyze, and address calmly. Failure becomes information rather than humiliation. Pressure becomes training rather than punishment. Gradually, the inner citadel becomes more than a refuge. It becomes a command center from which your actions emerge with purpose and clarity. And in the stillness of that inner space, friend, you begin to realize that the strongest advantage any person can carry through life is not the absence of obstacles, but the presence of a mind so steady, so disciplined, and so deeply anchored in its own principles that no external storm can shake the foundation on which it stands. Once the inner citadel begins to take shape, something interesting happens inside the mind. You no longer feel the constant urge to control the unpredictable world outside your walls. Instead, you become more curious about it, more observant, more strategic. And this is where another quiet Stoic discipline begins to unfold, one that may seem unusual at first glance, but proves incredibly powerful once understood. the discipline of anticipation. Friend, most people try to protect their peace by imagining that the future will cooperate with their plans. They picture success unfolding smoothly, projects progressing exactly as expected, relationships remaining stable, efforts producing quick rewards. When reality disrupts these hopeful pictures, disappointment hits with full force because the mind was unprepared. The Stoic thinker approaches the future differently. Rather than assuming everything will go right, they calmly imagine what could go wrong. At first, this sounds pessimistic, but it is not pessimism at all. It is preparation. In moments like this throughout our audiobook journey, I often ask listeners to pause and reflect on how much emotional suffering comes not from events themselves, but from being surprised by them. A sudden obstacle appears, a plan fails unexpectedly, someone breaks a promise, circumstances change overnight. The event may be difficult, yes, but the shock of it multiplies the pain. Anticipation removes that shock. When you train the mind to quietly consider possible difficulties ahead of time, you begin to build emotional readiness. The entrepreneur preparing for a new venture imagines setbacks in advance, funding delays, customer rejection, unexpected competition. The leader guiding a team through uncertain terrain considers what might happen if plans collapse or if circumstances change suddenly. The athlete preparing for competition visualizes exhaustion, mistakes, and pressure before stepping onto the field. By doing this, they are not inviting failure. They are strengthening resilience. Because once the mind has calmly examined the possibility of difficulty, the arrival of that difficulty no longer feels like a disaster. It becomes a situation that was already acknowledged, already considered, already prepared for. I have found that this discipline changes the emotional atmosphere of decision-making. When people assume success is guaranteed, they become careless. When they quietly recognize that obstacles are always possible, their thinking becomes sharper. Plans become more thoughtful. Effort becomes more focused. This anticipation also deepens gratitude. When you understand how easily plans can fail, you begin to appreciate the moments when things go well. Success stops feeling like entitlement and starts feeling like a gift earned through preparation and persistence. Friends, the Stoic mind is not gloomy. It is realistic. It does not deny the possibility of success, but it also does not fear the possibility of difficulty. It holds both ideas at the same time, calmly preparing for each. And strangely, this balanced awareness creates peace. Fear fades because nothing arrives completely unexpected. Anxiety fades because the mind has already rehearsed how it might respond. Even when the path becomes complicated, there is a quiet steadiness within you because you already understand that complexity is part of the journey. This habit of anticipation strengthens perception, strengthens action, and strengthens the will. You become less reactive and more deliberate, less surprised and more prepared, less shaken by sudden change and more capable of adapting to it. Over time, friend, this mental discipline turns uncertainty into something far less intimidating. The future remains unpredictable, yes, but it no longer feels threatening. It becomes a landscape you walk through with awareness, patience, and calm readiness. And as the journey continues, the mind that once feared obstacles begins to recognize them simply as possibilities already accounted for. Challenges that, when they arrive, will be met not with panic, but with the quiet confidence of someone who has already considered their presence and chosen to keep moving forward anyway. Preparing the mind for possible hardship gradually builds a kind of quiet resilience, because when you have already considered that the path may twist, break, or slow without warning, the shock of those moments loses its power. Yet anticipation alone is not the final lesson. At some point, friend, life presents situations that cannot be prevented, redirected, or solved immediately. Even the most disciplined perception, the most determined action, and the strongest will must eventually meet a deeper Stoic principle, the art of acquiescence. Now, this word often confuses people. They hear it and imagine surrender, weakness, resignation. But Stoic acceptance is none of those things. It is something far more powerful. It is the calm recognition that certain forces in life exist beyond our control, and that fighting those forces emotionally only drains the strength we need for the battles that truly matter. Imagine standing in the middle of a powerful storm. The wind howls, the rain lashes against the ground, and the sky darkens in ways no human effort could possibly command. You could shout at the clouds. You could curse the wind. You could demand that the storm obey your expectations. Yet the storm would continue exactly as it is. Energy spent resisting reality would accomplish nothing. The Stoic approach invites something different. Instead of exhausting yourself fighting the uncontrollable, you step back mentally and acknowledge what is already true. The storm exists. The challenge is present. The situation is real. Only after accepting that reality clearly can your mind begin to respond wisely. Throughout this audiobook journey, we have spoken about obstacles as opportunities, about turning adversity into advantage, about strategic thinking and disciplined action. But here we encounter a quieter strength. Some circumstances cannot be immediately transformed. Some outcomes cannot be altered no matter how clever our strategies may be. In those moments, acceptance becomes the doorway to peace. Friend, acceptance does not mean abandoning effort. It means removing unnecessary emotional resistance so that your effort can remain focused and effective. When you stop arguing with reality, your mind becomes clear enough to see what still lies within your control. A business deal may collapse despite months of preparation. A trusted partnership may suddenly dissolve. A carefully designed plan may unravel because of events no one could have predicted. These moments feel heavy, and pretending they are easy would be dishonest. Yet within that difficulty exists a choice. You can allow frustration to dominate your thinking, or you can acknowledge the situation calmly and begin asking the only question that truly matters. What remains possible now? This is the essence of Stoic acceptance. Leaders who guide organizations through crisis often rely on this mindset without realizing it. They do not waste energy wishing the crisis had never happened. Instead, they accept the new reality quickly, gather the facts, and begin working from where they actually stand. Athletes do the same thing when injuries interrupt their training. They do not pretend the injury does not exist. They accept the limitation, adapt their preparation, and continue strengthening what remains available. In this way, acceptance becomes a form of strategic patience. It removes emotional noise and allows the mind to focus clearly on the next step. Over time, practicing this discipline creates a deep inner calm. You begin to understand that peace does not come from controlling the world. It comes from aligning your response with the truth of the moment. Friends, life will continue to deliver circumstances beyond your influence. Unexpected change will always be part of the human experience. Yet when you learn the art of acquiescence, these events lose their ability to break your spirit. Instead, they become moments where the strength of your character quietly reveals itself. Moments where you stand calmly within reality as it is, steady in your principles, ready to move forward again when the next opportunity appears. Once you begin practicing the quiet discipline of acceptance, something even deeper begins to unfold within the mind. Acceptance clears the fog of resistance. But beyond acceptance lies a more powerful transformation, a shift so profound that the obstacle itself is no longer merely tolerated. It is embraced as part of the path. This idea has echoed through Stoic philosophy for centuries, carried in a phrase both simple and extraordinary: amor fati, love your fate. Friend, this is where the Stoic mindset reaches one of its most courageous heights. It is one thing to endure hardship. It is another to accept it calmly. Yet to look at every twist of fate, the victories and the losses, the opportunities and the disappointments, and say, this too belongs in my story, requires a rare kind of strength. In moments like this within our audiobook journey, I often invite listeners to imagine their lives not as a series of random interruptions, but as a long, unfolding narrative. Every challenge that once felt unfair, every delay that once felt frustrating, every failure that once seemed like the end of the road eventually becomes a turning point that shapes the person you become. The Stoics believe that resisting fate creates unnecessary suffering. The universe moves according to forces far larger than our individual plans. When we demand that life unfold exactly as we wish, we set ourselves up for constant frustration. Yet when we begin to embrace events as part of a greater unfolding, our perspective shifts. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" the mind begins to ask, "How can this serve my growth?" That question changes everything. Consider the entrepreneur whose first venture collapses unexpectedly. At first, the failure feels like defeat, like wasted time and effort. But years later, that same experience becomes the foundation of deeper wisdom, sharper instincts, stronger leadership. The obstacle that once appeared destructive becomes the teacher that shaped future success. Athletes experience this truth repeatedly. Injuries interrupt careers, competitions are lost, opportunities vanish. Yet many of the most resilient champions later recognize that those moments forced them to develop patience, mental toughness, and strategic awareness they might never have cultivated during easy victories. In other words, fate rarely wastes our suffering. Friends, loving your fate does not mean pretending that difficulty feels pleasant. It means recognizing that the entire journey, the struggles as much as the triumphs, contributes to the development of your character. The Stoic thinkers understood that life's obstacles often contain the raw material for personal evolution. Pain refines resilience. Delay strengthens patience. Failure sharpens judgment. Loss deepens appreciation. When you begin to embrace this perspective, something remarkable happens to your emotional landscape. Events that once felt like interruptions start to feel like necessary chapters in a larger story. Resistance fades. Curiosity replaces bitterness. I often think of it like sailing across a vast ocean. The sailor does not control the wind, yet the wind becomes the very force that moves the ship forward. Whether the wind arrives gently or violently, the skilled navigator adjusts the sails and continues the journey. Amor fati is that adjustment of the sails. It is the quiet decision to work with reality rather than fight it. It is the recognition that every experience, pleasant or painful, carries the possibility of strengthening the mind, clarifying purpose, and deepening wisdom. Friend, when this mindset truly takes root, life becomes lighter in an unexpected way. You no longer spend energy wishing the past had unfolded differently. You stop fearing the uncertainty of the future. Instead, you stand calmly in the present moment, ready to meet whatever arrives with curiosity and courage. And in that calm awareness, the struggles that once seemed like burdens begin to reveal themselves as something else entirely, not obstacles standing in your way, but powerful forces shaping the very person you are becoming as you continue walking forward through the unfolding story of your life. When you begin to truly embrace your fate, not merely tolerate it, not simply endure it, but accept that every twist of life belongs to the path, something powerful happens inside the human spirit. Resistance fades, fear loosens its grip, and the mind becomes steadier. Yet, even with that understanding, the journey forward still demands one more quiet strength, one that has carried explorers across oceans, innovators through years of uncertainty, and ordinary individuals through extraordinary trials. That strength is perseverance. Friend, perseverance is not a sudden burst of motivation or a dramatic moment of heroism. More often, it is quiet, almost invisible. It lives in the small decisions that repeat themselves day after day. The choice to continue when results are slow, the willingness to keep refining your effort when progress seems distant, the discipline to move forward even when enthusiasm fades. In many ways, perseverance is where philosophy meets real life. Ideas about resilience and stoic calm sound inspiring when spoken aloud, but their true value reveals itself during long seasons of effort when the path becomes difficult and the destination still feels far away. The entrepreneur working late nights on an uncertain project understands this feeling well. So does the athlete who trains alone while others celebrate early victories. So does the leader guiding people through complex challenges that cannot be solved overnight. Perseverance is the bridge between intention and achievement. Throughout this audiobook journey, we have explored how perception shapes our experience of obstacles, how disciplined action turns resistance into opportunity, and how the strength of the will allows us to endure hardship with dignity. Perseverance brings all of these elements together. It is the long-term commitment to applying those principles again and again, even when immediate rewards are absent. Many people begin their ambitions with excitement, but excitement is temporary. It rises quickly and fades just as quickly when difficulty appears. Perseverance, however, is not dependent on mood. It is built on discipline and clarity of purpose. I often tell friends that perseverance grows strongest when the mind stops expecting the journey to be easy. Once you accept that meaningful work will involve setbacks, delays, and moments of doubt, the appearance of those challenges stops feeling like failure. They simply become part of the terrain. Think about the sculptor shaping a block of marble. The final masterpiece emerges only after thousands of careful strikes. Each strike may appear small, almost insignificant by itself, yet together they transform rough stone into something remarkable. Life operates the same way. Progress rarely happens in sudden leaps. More often it unfolds through consistent effort applied patiently over time. Perseverance also requires emotional discipline. There will be days when frustration whispers that the effort is pointless. There will be moments when comparison with others creates doubt. Yet the Stoic mindset gently returns the focus to what truly matters. The work in front of you, the step that can be taken today, the small improvement that can be made right now. Friends, perseverance does not promise a perfect outcome. It offers something far more valuable. It guarantees that your growth will continue regardless of circumstances. Every challenge faced strengthens resilience. Every obstacle navigated sharpens judgment. Every day of effort deepens character. Gradually, the distance between who you were and who you are becoming begins to grow. Years later, when people look at the results of perseverance, the thriving company, the refined skill, the calm leader guiding others through difficulty, they often assume the journey must have been straightforward. They rarely see the countless quiet moments where persistence was chosen over surrender. But you will know, because perseverance is not a single dramatic act. It is the quiet rhythm of continuing forward, step after step, with clarity of mind, steadiness of will, and the calm understanding that success through struggle is not merely possible. It is often the only path that leads to something truly meaningful. Perseverance, when practiced long enough, begins to reveal something surprising about the human spirit. At first, persistence feels personal. You push forward because of your own goals, your own ambitions, your own desire to prove something to the world or perhaps to yourself. Yet as the journey stretches across months and years, the struggle begins to reshape your perspective. The work you do, the discipline you cultivate, the obstacles you overcome, they slowly start pointing beyond the narrow boundaries of the self. And that realization introduces one of the most powerful sources of strength a person can discover: the sense that your effort serves something larger than your own comfort or recognition. Friend, throughout this audiobook journey, we have explored perception, action, and the quiet endurance of the will. Each of these principles strengthens the individual. But when the individual begins to connect their struggle to a purpose that extends beyond personal gain, resilience deepens in a way that is difficult to describe until it is experienced. Think about the leader guiding a team through uncertainty. Their perseverance is no longer only about their own success. People rely on their clarity, their stability, their ability to remain calm under pressure. Their discipline becomes a source of strength for others. In that moment, persistence transforms from personal ambition into responsibility. Entrepreneurs often discover this transformation as well. What begins as a personal project slowly evolves into a mission that provides opportunities for employees, solutions for customers, and inspiration for others who dare to build something meaningful. The work becomes larger than the individual who started it. Athletes feel this shift when their dedication begins inspiring teammates, communities, even younger generations who watch their journey and realize what disciplined effort can achieve. Purpose expands the capacity of the human will. When you believe that your struggle contributes to something meaningful beyond yourself, fatigue loses much of its power. Disappointment still appears, obstacles still emerge, yet the reason to continue becomes stronger than the temptation to quit. I have often reflected on this during moments when effort feels exhausting. In those quiet moments, I remind myself that the challenges we face rarely affect only us. Our courage influences those around us. Our discipline sets examples that ripple outward in ways we may never fully see. Friends, this is why Stoic philosophy places such emphasis on virtue and responsibility. The Stoics understood that a life guided solely by personal comfort quickly becomes fragile, but a life guided by purpose, by service, contribution, and integrity develops extraordinary resilience. When your work aligns with something meaningful, obstacles begin to feel different. They are no longer interruptions to your comfort. They are tests of your commitment. They ask a simple but powerful question: how deeply do you believe in the path you have chosen? And that question often reveals hidden reserves of strength. There are moments in every long pursuit when exhaustion whispers that stopping would be easier. Yet the memory of the people who depend on you, the impact your work might create, the example you wish to set, these reminders quietly pull you forward. In those moments, perseverance transforms into devotion. The Stoic thinkers often reminded themselves that they were part of a larger human community, part of a broader unfolding of history and purpose. Their actions mattered not only because of personal outcomes, but because of the character they demonstrated while facing difficulty. And when you begin to see your journey through that wider lens, friend, something beautiful happens. The obstacles that once seemed heavy begin to feel meaningful. The struggles that once felt isolating become opportunities to contribute, to lead, to inspire. You realize that your effort is part of something larger, a quiet chain of resilience passed from one generation to the next. And with that awareness, the path forward becomes clearer, not because the obstacles disappear, but because the reason to keep walking has grown stronger than the obstacles themselves. When a person begins to live for something greater than their own comfort, a quiet shift occurs in the way they see time itself. Effort becomes more deliberate. Choices become more meaningful. The distractions that once felt urgent slowly lose their grip. And it is here, friends, that one of the most powerful reflections in Stoic philosophy quietly enters the mind, the understanding that life is temporary, not in a dark or frightening sense, but in a deeply clarifying one. The Stoics practiced a simple yet profound mental exercise. They reminded themselves that their time in this world was limited. This reflection, often called meditating on mortality, was not meant to create fear. It was meant to create urgency, focus, and appreciation for the present moment. Because when you truly recognize that your time is finite, something remarkable happens. The trivial concerns that once consumed your attention begin to fade into the background. The opinions of strangers lose their power. Petty frustrations become smaller. What remains are the things that truly matter: your character, your actions, your contribution, and the way you choose to respond to the challenges life places in your path. I sometimes imagine standing at the edge of a vast horizon, looking back at the years that have already passed and forward at the unknown stretch that remains. That quiet reflection brings a powerful question to the surface. If time is limited, what deserves my energy today? For entrepreneurs, leaders, athletes, and creators listening to this audiobook, that question becomes a compass. Every great achievement requires time, long stretches of focused effort, repeated attempts, patient learning, and perseverance through uncertainty. When you remember that life itself is limited, wasting that time on hesitation or fear begins to feel like a luxury you can no longer afford. Friend, mortality has a strange way of sharpening courage. When people believe they have endless time, they delay their ambitions. They postpone difficult conversations. They wait for the perfect moment that rarely arrives. But when the mind accepts that each day is part of a limited journey, the hesitation begins to dissolve. You start making decisions with greater clarity. You begin acting on the ideas that matter. You stop allowing small obstacles to derail your larger mission. This awareness also deepens resilience. Obstacles no longer feel like permanent walls because the bigger perspective reminds you that struggle itself is part of the human experience. Every generation before us has faced uncertainty, loss, setbacks, and adversity. Yet progress continued because individuals chose to act despite those realities. Mortality does not weaken the human spirit. It strengthens it. Because once you accept that life will eventually end, you gain the freedom to live more boldly within the time you have. The Stoic philosophers understood this well. They did not dwell on death in a morbid way. Instead, they used it as a reminder to live with intention, to focus on virtue, and to ensure that each day contained effort aligned with purpose. Friends, imagine approaching your work, your challenges, and your ambitions with that clarity. Imagine waking each morning aware that the day ahead is a piece of a limited and precious journey. Suddenly, discipline becomes easier. Procrastination loses its appeal. Complaining about obstacles begins to feel like wasted energy. The mind becomes calmer, yet more determined. You begin asking better questions. Not, why is this happening to me? But how can I use this moment wisely? Not, what if I fail? But what action deserves my effort today? Gradually, life transforms into something deeply intentional. Each challenge becomes a chance to grow stronger. Each obstacle becomes material for resilience. Each day becomes an opportunity to practice courage, patience, and discipline. And in that quiet awareness of time passing, you discover a strange but powerful peace. The understanding that what truly matters is not how long the journey lasts, but how fully you choose to live it while you are here. The awareness that time is limited carries another quiet lesson within it, one that many people resist at first but eventually learn through experience. Life does not move in a straight line. Progress rarely unfolds in a smooth upward climb. Even the most disciplined individuals, the most strategic thinkers, the strongest leaders eventually face moments when the path they were walking suddenly collapses beneath their feet. Plans fail. Systems break. Years of work can change direction in a single unexpected moment. This realization leads us to a truth that every resilient mind must eventually embrace: the ability to start again. Friend, starting again is not a sign of defeat. It is a sign of strength that has matured. It means you have lived long enough to understand that setbacks are not the end of the journey, but simply a redirection within it. Many people build their identity around a single plan, a single success, a single structure they hope will carry them forever. Yet reality has a way of dismantling even the most carefully constructed paths. Stoic philosophy prepares the mind for this reality long before it arrives. The Stoics understood that control in life is limited. We can control our effort, our preparation, our character, and our response. But outcomes often remain outside our command. Markets change. Opportunities disappear. Circumstances evolve. Even great empires eventually fade. The disciplined mind accepts this not with bitterness, but with calm readiness. Because when you accept that life may require you to begin again, you stop fearing change. You begin preparing for it. In the journey we have explored throughout this audiobook, we have spoken about perception, about action, about the endurance of the will. Starting again is where all three meet. Your perception determines whether a setback feels like failure or simply feedback. Your action determines whether you stand still in frustration or begin building a new path. Your will determines whether discouragement weakens you or quietly strengthens your resolve. I often remind friends that the most powerful people in history were not those who never fell. They were the ones who refused to remain where they had fallen. Think of the entrepreneur whose first venture collapses, yet uses the lessons learned to build something stronger the second time. Think of the athlete who suffers a devastating loss, studies their weaknesses, and returns with greater discipline. Think of leaders who faced public failure, yet rebuilt their credibility through patience and steady action. Their advantage was not perfection. Their advantage was adaptability. The Stoic mindset trains this adaptability through emotional discipline. When failure appears, the untrained mind reacts with panic, anger, or self-doubt. The disciplined mind pauses. It examines the situation calmly. It asks a different question, not, "Why did this happen to me?" but, "What can I learn from this moment?" And once that question is asked sincerely, something powerful begins to emerge. Clarity. Because within every collapse lies information. Within every failure lies instruction. Within every ending lies the raw material for a new beginning. Friends, preparing to start again does not mean expecting defeat. It means understanding the rhythm of growth. Every meaningful pursuit contains cycles of building, breaking, and rebuilding. Each cycle strengthens the mind, sharpens judgment, and deepens resilience. Eventually, the fear of failure begins to fade. You realize that even if circumstances force you to begin again, you carry something far more valuable than the original plan. You carry experience. You carry discipline. You carry the calm awareness that obstacles are not permanent barriers, but invitations to adapt. And when a person reaches that level of understanding, starting again no longer feels like returning to the beginning. It feels like continuing the journey with greater wisdom than before. Eventually, After traveling through all these reflections on perception, action, and the quiet endurance of the will, a deeper realization begins to settle in the mind. The struggles we once feared, the setbacks we tried desperately to avoid, the resistance that seemed to block our progress, all of it begins to look different. What once appeared as an enemy slowly reveals itself as a teacher. Friend, this is the moment where understanding matures. Throughout this audiobook journey, we have explored how the mind interprets difficulty, how disciplined action transforms challenge into opportunity, and how the strength of the human spirit allows us to endure far more than we once believed possible. Each principle on its own offers valuable guidance. Yet together they reveal something even more powerful. Obstacles are not separate from the path forward. They are the path forward. The moment you begin to see life through that lens, the entire experience of adversity changes. Think about the entrepreneur facing market rejection, the athlete recovering from defeat, the leader navigating crisis, or the young professional struggling through early uncertainty. At first, these obstacles appear like barriers placed in front of progress. Frustration rises. Doubt appears. The mind searches for easier roads. Yet time and experience slowly reveal a different truth. Without those very difficulties, the skills required for growth would never develop. Without resistance, there would be no reason to refine strategy, strengthen discipline, or deepen resilience. The obstacle does not block the way. The obstacle shapes the way. I remember moments in my own life where something unexpected disrupted carefully made plans. At the time, it felt unfair, almost like progress had been stolen away. But with distance and reflection, those same events revealed lessons that success alone could never teach. They sharpened perception. They demanded action. They strengthened the will. Friends, Stoic philosophy has never promised a life free from hardship. Instead, it offers something far more valuable: the ability to transform hardship into growth. When the mind practices perception with discipline, obstacles become information rather than emotional triggers. When action replaces hesitation, difficulties become opportunities for innovation. When the will remains steady through uncertainty, endurance becomes a quiet form of power. Over time, the individual who embraces these principles becomes remarkably difficult to defeat. Not because life suddenly becomes easy, but because every challenge now contributes to development. Failure becomes instruction. Delay becomes preparation. Adversity becomes refinement. In this way, the person who once feared obstacles eventually begins to welcome them, not with reckless enthusiasm, but with calm understanding. Each difficulty becomes a chance to apply the philosophy in real time. Each setback becomes a training ground for resilience. This transformation is subtle at first. You may simply notice that frustration fades faster. You may realize that problems no longer overwhelm your thinking the way they once did. Gradually, the mind becomes steadier, more strategic, more patient. And then one day, almost quietly, you recognize that the obstacles which once felt heavy have actually been guiding you all along. They forced you to grow stronger. They demanded that you think more clearly. They shaped the discipline that now defines your character. Friend, this is the quiet wisdom at the heart of everything we have explored together in this audiobook. Life will continue presenting challenges. New uncertainties will appear. The path forward will never be completely smooth. Yet armed with perception, action, and the disciplined strength of the will, you carry something more powerful than certainty. You carry the ability to adapt. You carry the courage to continue. You carry the calm understanding that every obstacle contains within it the raw material for progress. And when you walk forward with that awareness, the road ahead no longer feels blocked. It feels alive with possibility, shaped by struggle, strengthened by patience, and illuminated by the quiet truth that the very things standing in your way are often the very things showing you where to go next. The realization that obstacles guide our path rather than block it naturally leaves the mind in a place of quiet reflection. When you step back and observe the journey we have traveled together in this audiobook, a clear pattern begins to emerge. Every struggle that once appeared frustrating, every delay that once felt unfair, every moment of uncertainty that once tested your patience was slowly shaping something deeper within you. Not just success in the traditional sense, but character. Not merely achievement, but understanding. Friend, Stoic philosophy has always pointed toward this quiet transformation. It teaches that the world will not adjust itself to our preferences. Circumstances will change, pressure will appear, expectations will fail, and unexpected obstacles will rise exactly when we least want them to. Yet the Stoics never saw this as a cruel design of life. They saw it as the training ground for the human spirit. Because when perception becomes disciplined, you begin to see problems differently. What once looked like a dead end begins to reveal hidden possibilities. When action becomes consistent, you stop waiting for perfect conditions and start moving forward with what you have. When the will becomes stronger than fear or frustration, endurance stops feeling like suffering and begins to feel like power. Over time, these principles quietly reshape the way you approach everything: your work, your ambitions, your relationships, and the way you respond to pressure when the world becomes unpredictable. I often imagine life as a long road through changing landscapes. Some stretches are smooth and calm, where progress feels natural and motivation flows easily. Other stretches are steep, rocky, and uncertain, where each step requires patience and discipline. Most people celebrate the easy paths and resent the difficult ones. Yet the truth, as you now understand, is that the difficult paths are the ones that build the strength needed for the journey ahead. Friends, resilience is not something that appears suddenly during crisis. It is built gradually through small acts of discipline repeated over time. The athlete who wakes before sunrise to train, the entrepreneur who keeps improving an idea after repeated rejection, the leader who remains calm while others panic. These individuals are not simply lucky or gifted. They have trained their perception, their action, and their will. That training is available to anyone willing to practice it. You now understand that you cannot control every outcome. Markets change. People change. Circumstances change. Yet you always control something far more powerful: your response. Your ability to remain steady when pressure appears. Your commitment to keep moving forward when progress feels slow. Your discipline to transform adversity into opportunity. And that, friend, is where true growth begins. As this audiobook experience slowly comes to rest, I want you to pause for a moment and reflect on your own journey. Think about the obstacles currently standing in your path, the challenges that once seemed frustrating or unfair, the setbacks that made you question your direction. Now look at them again through the lens you have developed here. Those obstacles are not simply barriers. They are invitations. Invitations to think more clearly, to act more decisively, to strengthen your will, and to grow into a stronger version of yourself. This journey of growth does not end here. In many ways, it is only beginning. The ideas we explore together are meant to live in daily practice, in the decisions you make, the patience you develop, and the courage you carry into the challenges ahead. If this audiobook sparked new perspectives for you, if these reflections helped you see obstacles with greater clarity and strength, then I warmly invite you, friends, to continue this journey with us. Your support helps this community of learning grow. Take a moment to like this audiobook, Share it with someone who may need encouragement today, and subscribe to CliffNote Chronicles so you never miss the next exploration into powerful ideas, timeless philosophy, and practical wisdom designed to help you grow stronger, wiser, and more resilient with every challenge life places in your path. Until the next journey begins, keep moving forward with calm focus, disciplined action, and the quiet confidence that every obstacle you face is shaping the road that will lead you exactly where you are meant to go.